Natalee Holloway was born on October 21, 1986 in Clinton, Mississippi. Later, she moved to Mountain Brook, Alabama. As the eldest of two siblings with a younger brother named Matthew, Natalie was raised in a loving and close-knit family. Her parents, Beth and David, were high school sweethearts who married in the 1980s but separated in 1993 after 13 years of marriage. Despite the divorce, David remained actively involved in his children's lives. In 2000, Beth remarried George "Jug" Twitty, a businessman from Alabama, and the family moved to Mountain Brook. Natalie thrived in this supportive environment, excelling academically and participating in various extracurricular activities. She was excited to celebrate her high school graduation with a trip before starting her pre-med studies at the University of Alabama, where she had earned a full scholarship. Although her parents were initially hesitant, they ultimately supported her decision to take the trip, unaware of the tragic events that would soon unfold. Natalee Holloway was eager to make the most of her trip to Aruba and thrilled about the adventure. On May 26, 2005, she, along with 125 of her Mountain Brook High School classmates and 7 chaperones, arrived on the Caribbean island. The group stayed at the Holiday Inn, and soon after arriving, the students were allowed to explore the island independently. Natalie and her friends spent the next few days sunbathing, snorkeling, and enjoying the local nightlife. It was her first time experiencing legal drinking, which she embraced. The group frequently visited popular spots like the nightclub Carlos and Charlie's and the Excelsior Casino, both near their hotel. On May 29, 2005, the last day of their trip, Natalie and her friends were at the casino near a blackjack table when they encountered a Dutch tourist named Joran van der Sloot. Joran, a visiting student from the Netherlands, introduced himself to Natalie, and they quickly hit it off. His group planned to head to Carlos and Charlie's, and they invited Joran to join them. Just before closing time, Joran arrived at the club and offered Natalie some drinks at the back bar, which she accepted. Unbeknownst to her, one of the drinks had been spiked with a substance known as Liquid X, a colorless, odorless drug that requires only a few drops to render the victim disoriented and unable to remember what happens next. As the drug began to take effect, Natalie felt increasingly ill. Joran concocted a story about a shark sighting near the lighthouse and convinced Natalie to come with him to the beach. He led her to a silver-gray Honda parked outside the club, where his friend Deepak was driving, and his brother Satish sat in the front seat. Natalie's friends saw her leave with the stranger, but they did not intervene. This would be the last time anyone would see Natalee Holloway. By the morning of May 30th, 2005, when the Mountain Brook students were preparing to board their flight home, Natalie was missing. Beth received a devastating call that her daughter hadn't shown up for the flight. In a panic, Beth boarded a private jet owned by a friend and arrived in Aruba within 12 hours. She immediately went to the local police station to report Natalie's disappearance, urging them to begin an investigation. Beth insisted on reviewing security footage from the casino with the manager, which revealed that Natalie had left the club with Joran. Investigations uncovered that Joran was a known regular at Aruba's casinos, involved in gambling, drug use, and other questionable activities. He lived in a guest house on his family's property and had a reputation for targeting women on their last night in Aruba, isolating them from their friends, drugging them, and assaulting them at his guest house. Despite numerous allegations of aggravated assault, Joran had never faced consequences, as his well-crafted plans left little evidence. Around 3 a.m. the next day, Beth convinced the police to take her to the Van der Sloot residence. There, she met Joran's father, Paul van der Sloot, who immediately denied any connection between his son and the case. Joran, along with Deepak and Satish, joined the conversation. When Beth confronted them, Joran claimed they had only gone for a few drinks and dropped Natalie off at her hotel. Paul, a local judicial official, intervened, advising his son to stop engaging with Beth, using his position to protect Joran and buy time to eliminate any evidence. The police offered minimal assistance, leaving Beth no choice but to return to the station. Hotel security footage later disproved Joran's claims, showing no sign of Natalie being dropped off. By this point, Natalie's father, David, had arrived in Aruba to join the search. Despite 48 hours passing since Natalie's disappearance, the police hesitated to consider Joran a suspect, repeatedly assuring the family that Natalie would soon be found. As the public pressure mounted, investigators finally questioned Joran and the Kalpoe brothers. Initially, Joran and the brothers claimed they had taken Natalie to the California lighthouse to watch sharks before dropping her off at the hotel around 2 a.m. on May 30, 2005. However, discrepancies in their stories led to the eventual arrest of the three suspects as the search for Natalie continued without yielding significant clues. On June 26th, Satish Kalpoe admitted to lying to the police during his initial questioning. He later changed his statement, claiming that he and Deepak had dropped off Joran and Natalie at the hotel, which was the last time they saw her. Meanwhile, a gardener from the Aruba Racket Club provided a sworn statement, claiming to have seen the three men in a car near the club around 2 a.m., contradicting the Kalpoe brothers' earlier assertion that they were already home by that time. As the case continued to unravel with conflicting testimonies and no sign of Natalie, the Aruba Police Department, Dutch Marines, FBI agents, and thousands of local volunteers searched every corner of the area, though only on land. Finally, on June 25th, a group of volunteers deployed divers and sonar equipment in hopes of finding any evidence. 6 weeks after Natalie's disappearance, her family offered a $200,000 reward for her safe return and $100,000 for any information leading to the case's resolution. By the end of July, the reward was raised to $1 million for Natalie's safe return. Beth stayed in Aruba for 2 full months, leaving just a week before the Kalpoe brothers, who had previously been released, were rearrested on August 26th. The brothers, along with Joran, were released again on September 3. In late August, divers from the Araban Search Team and the Rescue Foundation returned to the search after receiving a tip about a radar machine detecting human bones about a mile off the coast, but they found nothing. In March 2006, 10 months after Natalie's disappearance, Aruban authorities reported that witnesses had stated the teenager had been drinking heavily that night and had cocaine in her possession, though no one claimed to have seen her using it. Authorities believe that Natalie might have entered a state of shock, experiencing a severe reaction due to the combination of alcohol and possibly other drugs, either taken voluntarily or administered to her. This could have caused her to collapse, leading search teams to believe she had died. Consequently, efforts were focused on the beach where Joran claimed to have last seen her and a nearby salt lagoon, where they searched for forensic evidence. Throughout the investigation, Joran's story kept changing. He seemed intrigued by the media attention and used it to his advantage, frequently contacting news outlets with claims of new evidence, often attempting to extort money for fabricated leads. Joran van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987, in Arnhem, Netherlands. He was known as an honor student and a tennis star at the International School of Aruba. His father, a lawyer, was in the process of becoming a judge at the time of Natalie's disappearance. One of Natalie's close friends remembered her first impression of Duran, noting his height and thinking it was odd that he was hanging out with their group. Despite her initial observation, she did not immediately suspect him. Duran was quickly identified by a Holiday Inn employee as a regular who often targeted young female tourists. He spent 3 months in jail but was released when a judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to hold him. By the end of 2007, he and the Calpo brothers were arrested again, but once more, nothing came of it, and they were released. Duran later traveled freely across the world, spending time in Thailand and engaging in suspicious activities, though he managed to evade capture. He frequently discussed the case, seemingly relishing the notoriety it brought him. His temper was unpredictable. During an interview with Dutch crime reporter in January 2008, Duran threw a glass of wine at Peter when questioned about the credibility of his claims. In November 2008, CNN reported that Aruban authorities had 2 new leads to investigate. One came from a witness who claimed to have seen Paulus van der Sloot on the night of May 29, 2005. He told police that while Paulus claimed to have been sleeping at home by 7 a.m. that night, his son was allegedly near a lagoon on the island at 4 a.m. on May 30, 2005. The witness mentioned seeing a young man, wet from the waist down and missing a shoe, running from the lagoon toward a fast food restaurant. Shortly after, the young man was joined by an older individual who drove by in a red Jeep about 10 minutes later. Another lead came from Duran's ex-girlfriend, who reported that Duran had once mentioned being on the beach with someone capable of disposing of a body. To aid the search, the family hired a private investigator who spent nearly a year knocking on every door in Aruba. On October 21, 2005, Natalie's birthday, they were at an Aruban landfill, digging through garbage when the deputy police chief suggested shifting their search to the sea. A recent break-in at a fisherman's hut had resulted in the theft of items like fishing traps and tools that could potentially be used to sink a body. A businessman who had been following the case offered to fund a search of the seabed. In November 2007, a ship named Persistent set out for Aruba. On December 24th, they discovered what appeared to be a fishing trap approximately 90 feet deep. On December 29th, a remotely operated vehicle was sent to investigate, and it detected what seemed to be a skull. On December 30th, a diver from the ship joined Aruba's police divers, but they found no evidence related to Natalie. Despite persistent new clues and witness statements, each lead seemed to result in a dead end. In early 2008, a man who identified himself as Marcos contacted Beth Holloway, claiming that drug traffickers had been paid to dispose of Natalie's body at sea, but had instead transported her remains to Nicaragua and buried them. The private investigator traveled to Nicaragua to meet Marcos, who agreed to use a GPS tracker to locate the remains. Later, Marcos called the private detective, claiming he had found Natalie, stating that her body was wrapped in a tarp and badly decomposed. Marcos advised the detective to inform Beth Holloway immediately. However, the detective chose not to make the call, fearing it would only give Beth false hope. Marcos disappeared shortly thereafter. In February 2010, Paulus van der Sloot, Duran's father, suddenly died of a heart attack, leaving his son in a precarious situation. A month later, Duran, using the alias Jet Sanders, contacted John Kelly, the Holloway family attorney, in a desperate state. In an email, he claimed to know where Natalie's body was and offered to help the family, but only for a price. Duran demanded $250,000 in exchange for revealing the location and details of what had happened to Natalie, stating that he now wanted to be truthful. His father was dead. He had nothing to hide and he wanted to help the family, but at a cost. After Beth Holloway authorized the payment, John Kelly arranged a meeting with Joran in Aruba, initially offering $25,000 up front. Joran claimed to know where Natalie's body was, but when asked what would happen if he wasn't paid, he allegedly responded coldly, suggesting Beth could wait another 5 years. The family then turned to the FBI for assistance. They devised a plan to trick Joran into thinking he was being paid, aiming to catch him committing wire fraud. During their meetings, John transferred $25,000 to Joran. Joran led John to a house near the Aruba Racket Club, claiming that Natalie's remains were buried beneath freshly poured foundations before the house was built. He stated that on the night of Natalie's disappearance, they had argued on the beach, and in a fit of rage, he had thrown her, causing her to hit her head and die from blood loss. John doubted the truth of Joran's story, which suggested he initially hid the body on the beach with the help of his father before burying it. However, the house Joran pointed to hadn't been under construction since 2010. Authorities deemed the story insufficient to issue an arrest warrant. Joran continued to communicate with John until May 25th, when he claimed he was going to turn himself in. Instead, he fled to Peru with the extorted money. On June 30th, 2010, a federal grand jury indicted him on charges of wire fraud and extortion. Joran quickly reverted to his old ways after landing in Peru. He approached 21-year-old Stephanie Flores, a university student at the Atlantic City Casino in Lima, Peru. According to security footage, they played poker together for about an hour or two. After Stephanie had cashed in some chips, she left with Joran, heading to a hotel, where he picked up the key to room 309 at around 5 a.m. They were last seen ascending the stairs together, disappearing into the room. By mid-morning on May 30th, 2010, Joran was locked out of his room and called the front desk to be let in. He left 20 minutes later with only a backpack. The television in the room was left on, and he told the receptionist, "Don't disturb my girl," before departing. 2 days later, hotel staff discovered Stephanie's brutally beaten body inside room 309. Stephanie's father, Ricardo Flores, a well-known businessman and former race car driver, brought significant media attention to the case. Joran fled south and was eventually arrested in Chile. He tried to change his appearance, shaving his head and dyeing his hair blonde, discarding most of his belongings except his laptop. The Lima police reported that Joran initially denied the crime, but after 4 days in custody, he confessed to killing Stephanie. He claimed they went to his room to do some online gambling, but she briefly left and returned. When she did, she found information on his laptop linking him to Natalee Holloway's disappearance. This discovery caused her to panic and try to leave the room, which further enraged Joran. In a fit of fury, he killed her. Stephanie had suffered a neck fracture, likely leading to paralysis minutes before her death. The autopsy later revealed she was still conscious when Joran dropped her body to the floor and took a quick shower. Realizing she was still alive, he used his shirt to strangle her to death before fleeing. Joran added one final act of indignity by placing Stephanie's body in a suggestive position before leaving the room. The entire case shocked the public, as it seemed the past was repeating itself with another victim. Joran was charged with first-degree murder and robbery in Peru, along with wire fraud and extortion as charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Birmingham, Alabama. His defense lawyer argued that the crime was involuntary manslaughter, but Joran ultimately pleaded guilty to the murder charges. The defense claimed Joran suffered from severe psychological trauma due to the Holloway case. The court sentenced him to 28.5 years in prison in 2012. This was the first victory for the Holloway family after years of trauma and agony. Beth Holloway visited Duran in the prison where he was held in September 2010. A Dutch documentary team provided a glimpse into how Duran survived in one of the harshest prisons in the world. Beth described the moment as liberating, stating that Duran's imprisonment was the culmination of her 5-year struggle. His incarceration marked a turning point for the victims' families, allowing them to move forward with their lives. In July 2014, Duran was set to marry his pregnant fiancée, Lydie Figueroa. Lydie told a local news outlet that she met Duran in 2010 while visiting another inmate with her cousin. Conjugal visits were permitted at the maximum security prison in northern Lima, where Duran spent the first years of his sentence. According to Lydie, her future husband had transformed into a new person. In August, Duran was transferred to another prison in the Andes Mountains, known for its harsher conditions, after allegedly threatening to kill the director of the previous prison. Lydie, who gave birth to a daughter in September, later claimed that Duran had been stabbed by a cellmate. These accusations were later denied by the director of Peru's National Penitentiary Institute, who called her a compulsive liar. In a 2015 interview, Lydie provided Fox News Latino with a letter Duran had written from prison, in which he alleged that Stephanie's father had put a $10,000 bounty on his head. "I don't want to die," he wrote. By this point, both the authorities and media knew that Duran was a compulsive liar and a sociopath, but the severity of his crimes and his refusal to show any signs of remorse, guilt, or fear only highlighted his manipulative nature. In June 2023, Duran was extradited to Birmingham, Alabama, to face extortion charges in federal court, where he initially pleaded not guilty. Later, in October, he changed his plea and confessed to killing Natalie as part of a plea deal, which resulted in a 20-year sentence for wire fraud and extortion, to be served concurrently with his ongoing sentence in Peru. Duran finally admitted to the chilling events of May 29, 2005, the night of Natalie's disappearance. According to him, the Calpo brothers dropped them off at the beach. Natalie began feeling ill and Duran claimed she kissed him briefly. But when he made further advances, she rejected him and kneed him in the groin. In response, Duran angrily kicked her in the head and then picked up a cinder block, the same one he said he found on the beach, and smashed her head with it. He then dragged Natalie's body into the ocean. The statute of limitations for filing murder charges in Aruba is 12 years. A spokesperson for the island's prosecutors requested that the U.S. Department of Justice provide its office with Duran's files before deciding on any prosecutorial steps. Natalee Holloway's case remains open in Aruba and has become one of the most famous missing person cases in the U.S. Losing a family member in foreign lands forever and witnessing the horrifying events that unfolded has surpassed any conceivable terror. Whether it was the laxity of the Aruba Police Department or the actions of those associated with Duran, all had a role in the disappearance of Natalee, a bright pre-med student who lost her life far too soon due to negligence. This case has raised many questions about law enforcement, the media, and society as a whole. Cecilia Haddad had moved to Australia over a decade ago. Her journey started in Perth, but she later relocated to New South Wales, where she worked as a logistics manager for a transportation company. By 2016, she had settled in Sydney, continuing her career with a mining and logistics firm in Western Australia. Cecilia was a happy and hard-working woman, passionate about ballet and diving. As a successful corporate executive, she had a bright future ahead of her. However, she found herself trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship. Cecilia hadn't come to Australia alone. She was accompanied by Marcelo Santoro, a friend she had known for nearly a decade, someone she had gone to university with in Brazil. What began as friendship gradually turned into romance. Cecilia fell deeply in love with Marcelo, but what started as a loving relationship soon turned into a nightmare. Over time, the jealousy and possessiveness of her partner became unbearable, and in early 2017, she made the decision to end the relationship. Unfortunately, Marcelo refused to accept the breakup. Though they had been separated for several months, they continued to live under the same roof. The situation became intolerable, and Cecilia started to fear for her safety. She asked Marcelo to leave the house, but he refused and began threatening her, insisting they should get back together. His behavior escalated to the point of stalking her in public. Cecilia's friends grew increasingly concerned and begged her to go to the police, but she hesitated. She had confided in her friends that Marcelo had once forced his way into her apartment. Terrified, she barricaded herself in her bedroom, shouting at him to leave while he pounded on the door, demanding to talk. About 10 days before her tragic end, Cecilia warned Marcelo that if he didn't leave the apartment, she would call the police. When it became clear that he had no intention of cooperating, Cecilia moved in with friends, feeling safer almost 3,000 miles away. Despite their pleas for her to report Marcelo to the authorities, she remained adamant that he would never physically harm her. She didn't want him to face legal trouble or deportation, as he was a fellow Brazilian. All she wanted was for him to leave her home. Sadly, her kind heart led to a tragic outcome. Marcelo was not the man Cecilia thought he was, and he was capable of causing her great harm. After spending several days away from her home, Cecilia felt safe enough to return. She had discovered that Marcelo had booked a flight back to Brazil, and with him thousands of miles away, she believed she would be out of danger. Early on the morning of April 28, 2018, she returned to her apartment. To her horror, Marcelo hadn't left. He pounded on her door, demanding to be let in, but Cecilia refused, unaware that he had a copy of her key. After waiting outside her building for several hours, Marcelo used the key to enter her apartment and ended Cecilia's life. Her friends became alarmed when she stopped responding to their messages. They had made plans for the weekend, but Cecilia never showed up. She also missed a scheduled meeting with a disabled client she cared for, which was unlike her. Fearing the worst, her friends reported her disappearance to Australian authorities and notified her family in Brazil. Cecilia's brother, Yoel Haddad, contacted Marcelo's mother, who initially claimed her son was not in Brazil. However, just 5 minutes later, Marcelo called João, confirming that he was indeed in Brazil. Something didn't add up. Shortly after this strange interaction, Marcelo's mother called again, admitting that her son was in Brazil and was on medication. João's suspicions were confirmed when he overheard Marcelo in the background, instructing his mother on what to say. Sadly, there was nothing they could do to save Cecilia. Days after her disappearance, the 38-year-old's body was found by rowers in a river about 5 miles from her apartment. Initially, the police did not suspect foul play, thinking it was a tragic accident. However, after Cecilia's red Fiat was found abandoned at a train station, about 7 miles from where her body was discovered, a murder investigation was launched. Someone had used her car to flee, and all eyes were on the one person capable of causing her harm. Authorities revealed a chilling discovery. Someone had weighed down Cecilia's body with gym weights in her pants pockets, hoping to sink her to the bottom of the lake and erase her existence forever. When her friends heard the heartbreaking news, they were shocked and devastated, but also consumed with guilt. They regretted not reporting Santoro to the police sooner. Cecilia's tragic death left everyone shattered. According to the thousands of messages reviewed by the Australian police, along with statements from friends and family, Cecilia had ended her relationship with Marcelo Santoro, but he refused to accept it. Just 36 hours after Cecilia's death, Santoro had flown to his home in Rio de Janeiro, immediately becoming the prime suspect. The police spent months analyzing evidence to build a solid case against Santoro. There was overwhelming evidence against him. Security footage showed him driving Cecilia's car, and traces of sand and vegetation from the area where her body was found were discovered inside the vehicle. Detectives also uncovered crucial footage from cameras installed in Santoro's apartment. These recordings allowed them to track his movements in the 48 hours leading up to and following the murder. The detectives used cell towers to track Santoro's phone, comparing its movements with surveillance footage collected from homes and businesses along his route. The analysis revealed that his phone connected to a tower near the lake before reaching the final location. The police believe that Santoro had driven around searching for a place to dispose of the body, eventually finding a secluded area along the waterfront. According to their theory, Santoro strangled Cecilia in her apartment's kitchen, then dumped her body in the water. The next morning, he fled to Rio de Janeiro. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the extradition process complicated matters, as Australia's extradition treaties with Brazil meant that Santoro could not be immediately arrested and charged for the murder in Sydney. This led to an international manhunt involving Interpol and high-level negotiations between the two countries. Finally, on July 7, 2018, Brazilian police arrested Marcelo Santoro, 40, at his sister's apartment in a neighborhood in the southern zone of Rio. In a brief hearing, Santoro claimed that he had planned to fly from Australia to Brazil in May, but had moved up the flight due to his father's health issues. The timing of Cecilia's death and his sudden departure raised investigator suspicions, and no one believed his alibi. The authorities were determined to ensure that Santoro faced justice. Santoro remained in one of Brazil's highest security prisons following his arrest. It wasn't until 5 years later, in June 2023, that his trial finally began. Flanked by armed guards and wearing a white shirt and blue pants, Santoro informed the judge that he had changed his legal team, surprising the prosecutors and detectives who had flown from Sydney to Rio to present evidence. The switch delayed the trial by several months. When it finally resumed, Santoro, for the first time, addressed the court, insisting that his return to Rio had been planned in advance. His new lawyer argued that Santoro had flown back to Brazil because his father was undergoing heart surgery. Security footage presented to the jury confirmed that Santoro had been in Cecilia's apartment the day she was murdered. The reconstruction of events showed that on April 29th, Santoro ordered a car through a rideshare app at a station in the suburb. The driver confirmed this and provided information about the route, which included a stop at a gas station. There, a camera captured Santoro withdrawing money from an ATM, a transaction verified by the bank. After collecting the cash, Santoro returned to the car and asked the driver to take him to Sydney Airport. Initially, the driver hesitated to alter the planned route, but Santoro offered him $50 to continue to the airport. They drove across the bridge over the river, where Santoro had likely disposed of the body just hours earlier. As they passed the spot, Santoro asked the driver to stay in the left lane. While there, the driver saw Santoro lower the window and throw something out. He thought it was a set of keys. The journey continued and they arrived at Sydney Airport at 7:23 a.m., sealing Santoro's escape to Brazil. During the trial, Santoro maintained a stern expression, avoiding interaction with others and only responding to questions from his lawyer. A police investigator testified that, in informal conversations while in custody, Santoro had confessed to the details of the crime. According to the officer, Santoro admitted to having a heated argument with Cecilia and strangling her until she died. He then left the apartment, returning 2 hours later to dispose of her body in a river. In his testimony, the detective added that Santoro had said he was recounting the story informally and would only provide an official statement in the presence of a lawyer. However, once he had legal representation, Santoro refused to answer further questions. After this testimony, Cecilia's father took the stand. He recalled how Cecilia had called him just weeks before the crime, telling him that her ex-boyfriend was following her and that she was afraid because he had been entering her apartment without permission. On one occasion, she came home from work to find him inside. She asked for her keys back, but he refused. He also recounted a phone conversation with Cecilia the day before the murder, during which she kept him on the line while she entered her apartment, fearing Santoro might be there. Once she confirmed he was not inside, she ended the call. Cecilia's stepmother testified next, saying that Cecilia had been suffering from psychological abuse for a long time. Andrea recalled a tearful phone call from Cecilia who said, "I can't live like this anymore." The final testimony came from Cecilia's brother, João Haddad, who described Santoro as threatening. He said that his sister lived in constant fear of what Santoro might do. Santoro would frequently monitor her, take her phone and computer, and she had blocked him on all social media platforms. She had started communicating with him only through email, writing in English so there would be a record that Australian authorities could easily understand. Joel also testified that he had asked his sister several times why she didn't force Santoro to leave or call the police. She responded that she was afraid of retaliation and felt guilty because Santoro was unemployed at the time. Santoro faced up to 30 years in prison, but he would never serve his sentence in Australia, as Brazil does not extradite its citizens. After several days of trial, Santoro finally confessed to the crime. In a chilling admission before the Brazilian court, he took responsibility for Cecilia's death and provided disturbing details of the attack. Tearfully, Santoro revealed that he had gone to Cecilia's apartment without her permission, where an argument ensued. In a moment of rage, he strangled her to silence her. He squeezed her neck so tightly that she collapsed. At that moment, he realized she was lifeless, but couldn't remember if she had hit her head when she fell. Panicking, he lifted her onto the sofa and tried to revive her, but she never woke up. Cecilia's mother was forced to leave the courtroom as Santoro recounted the grim details. Her brother, sitting in the front row, shook his head in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how this monster had taken his sister away. Santoro apologized to Cecilia's family, but his hollow words of remorse were not accepted by her loved ones. Before the sentencing, Cecilia's mother, wearing a white shirt with her daughter's picture on it, addressed the court, stating that Santoro was not a human being, but a monster who deserved to be imprisoned. The federal court in Rio de Janeiro sentenced Marcelo Santoro, a Brazilian engineer, to 27 years in prison for aggravated homicide, asphyxiation, femicide, and concealment of a body. The verdict was delivered by a jury of 6 women and 1 man. After the sentencing, Santoro's lawyer announced plans to appeal in hopes of reducing the sentence. For Cecilia's friends, the verdict provided only a small sense of relief. They expressed doubt that Santoro felt any true remorse for what he had done to their friend. They reflected on the loss of a daughter, an aunt, a sister, and a friend who could never be replaced. They hoped that now, at last, Cecilia can rest in peace. Cecilia had its family and friends, having witnessed firsthand the horrors of domestic violence, hoped that her tragic story can serve as a lesson to others. For them, Cecilia was never the face of domestic abuse. She was a strong, independent woman. Unfortunately, they came to realize the harsh reality faced by many women worldwide who are victims of violence at the hands of those who claim to love them. Her family urges people not to ignore the signs of abuse and violence. Though they tried to protect her, they now know it was never enough. They trust that authorities and justice will intervene where they could not. Above all, they hope that Cecilia's story will raise awareness and inspire action to prevent other victims from suffering the same fate. Little is known about the early life of John Parker. It's scarcely mentioned that he was born in 1970, had at least one sibling, and lived in Indiana, United States. He came from a middle-class family and was always an entrepreneurial young man with a desire for independence, self-improvement, and a hunger to take on the world. Therefore, it's not surprising that immediately after graduating from high school, he sought ways to earn money and, according to his brother, his first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant, though he didn't last long there. For reasons unknown, John became angry at work and quit. However, this did not deter his ambitions, and sooner rather than later, he found a new job that not only allowed him more independence in his tasks, but also led him to discover his true calling, sales. John began working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family mocked him, but in a short time, John proved to everyone that he had found his direction in life. In fact, by the end of his first year, he was practically the company's #1 salesman in the area and announced he wouldn't settle for just that. Working long hours from 12 to 16 hours a day, he became not only a sales leader whose achievements were recognized at company meetings, but also a guide for other salespeople who found new ideas, inspiration, and a role model in him. It was during this time that he met 20-year-old Judy, a young girl who was born in October 1969 and lived in Texas in a low-income family of 3 children. She was very outgoing, and even though John was not looking to hire more salespeople at the time, Judy convinced him that she was the best in the sales field. Despite her young age, she was not a shy girl. In fact, she was a fully grown woman who, with her parents' consent, had married at 14 and was divorced with 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, by the time she met John. John decided to give this determined applicant a chance and became her mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Judy not only earned a place in the sales force led by John, but also won the heart of her boss, and sometime later, they embarked on a romantic relationship. John's life could not have been better. He had a well-earned reputation as an excellent salesman and trainer, and also had Judy's support in life and work. With these foundations, he decided to start his own business in Michigan, becoming a sales and service operator for Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, passing on his personal secret and the enthusiasm that had made him a star in the sector. His company was recognized as one of the top in the area, and John always highlighted that he had achieved this success thanks to Judy's support. In 1992, with his professional life resolved, the couple got married, and in the following years, they dedicated themselves to demonstrating what a good salesperson could achieve in life. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, bringing the number of children in the family to 4. They moved residences several times, always to better locations, and the children began to enjoy the benefits earned through the hard work of John and Judy. Initially, he had no issues with his wife's children. Christina was a sweet little girl, and Daniel was somewhat hyperactive and mischievous. The Parkers enjoyed a good home, excellent schools for the children, high-end cars, and frequent vacations. John was amassing a significant fortune and didn't want to hide it. On the contrary, he used it as an incentive for the young salespeople he trained, showing them what could be achieved through hard work. However, as time passed and Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems began. Christina's choice of friends was terrible, as she chose those with the worst behavior and engaged in drinking with them. Allegedly, according to some sources, she also used drugs. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Daniel was not on a good path either and seemed to be angry and poorly accompanied all the time. On one occasion, while with a group of friends, Daniel took John's car and drove around the neighborhood, destroying many of the mailbox posts. The next day, John went from house to house paying the owners for the damage caused to prevent them from reporting the boy to the police. Around this time, John was also called to his stepson's school to receive a complaint about the boy's bad behavior. It appears that on this occasion, John ended up hitting the young man, which of course generated tension in the relationship. After 9 years together, Judy finally took her family to Texas so they could see the humble place where she had grown up and meet one of her brothers who still lived there. During this trip, Judy complained to her brother that her marriage was failing and that John mistreated her children. The truth was that Judy, far from recognizing that her older children were on the wrong path, sided with them, which of course heated up what seemed to be a pressure cooker. If everything was already bad, things worsened when John began to suspect that his wife was being unfaithful with an employee of his company. True to his way of solving problems, John was not a man to sit and stew over a problem, but a man of action. To leave no room for doubt, he installed cameras in various parts of the office and finally obtained irrefutable proof that confirmed his suspicions. At that moment, John's world collapsed, and his previously cheerful and cordial behavior took a 180-degree turn. He began to drink, and under the influence of alcohol, he not only had terrible arguments with Judy but also became rough towards his children. His daughter Tiffany received a beating with a belt when her teacher informed her father that she had not brought her homework to school. When the teacher saw the marks from the beating the next day, she called social services to report the incident. Before they arrived, John made it clear to the 4 kids that if they wanted to continue enjoying the luxurious life they had been living up to that moment, it was better to say nothing about the beating. Indeed, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel for what had happened, and he did not deny it. However, John's bad mood didn't only affect his family. His employees and even the company's clients suffered from the betrayed husband's outbursts of rage. Seeking to put distance between his wife and her lover, he decided to move the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite still being in love with Judy and hoping that by removing her from temptation they could have a fresh start, things did not improve. While Judy began to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, John let his beard grow, started smoking, his wardrobe was reduced to jeans, and he was constantly distracted. The business suffered as a result of his state, ending up almost bankrupt and having to sell his boat to stay afloat. Rumors circulated in the office that Judy was having an affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man. Though it was unclear if the rumors were true, they undoubtedly fueled more disagreements. At a certain point, Judy informed him that she had decided to divorce, but it wouldn't be that simple. John felt that he had given everything to his wife, pulled her out of poverty, accepted her children, showered her with luxuries, and above all, loved her to the point of idolatry. With that same passion turned into resentment, he began to cut off all his wife's sources of money. He made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and his secret weapon was the recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the scenario at the beginning of 2003, and of course, the tensions between the couple affected the children, whose behavior went from bad to worse. Even Tiffany spent the holidays grounded because she and a friend had started a fire on school grounds. The end of the arguments came on Thursday, April 17, 2003, when John and Judy went out to dinner alone at a restaurant, possibly trying to find a solution to their situation, or maybe just trying to tone down the confrontation. After dinner, they called home to check on the kids and announced they would return shortly. At that moment, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. Leaving the restaurant, they headed to the company, and John took the opportunity to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late. The couple arrived at the office in a deserted industrial area just before 10 p.m. Both entered the office while John talked to Jeff. Judy picked up her daughter's notebook and returned to the car parked outside. Minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side to search for something in the vehicle, when suddenly two loud bangs were heard and John collapsed on the parking lot floor. Instantly, the 911 received calls from Judy and the other from Jeff. As routine in such cases, police and medical assistance units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was declared dead on the scene. Upon interrogating Judy, who was inside the car at the time of the incident, the woman could practically contribute nothing. She stated she was sitting there when her husband came out of the office, opened the back door on the driver's side, and immediately heard two detonations. Judy recounted that her reaction to hearing the shots was to hide, protecting herself with the seat, and when she lifted her head, she only managed to glimpse what seemed to be a man in dark clothing running away from the car. John's wallet was missing, so at first glance, the incident seemed to have been a robbery. But the more the scene was analyzed, the more doubts arose in the investigators' minds. No one besides the couple knew they were going to be there, so a series of questions were formulated. Why would someone be looking to commit a random robbery in an industrial area that had no people in circulation at night? If it had been a robbery, why did they first take his life and only then stripped him of his wallet when in plain sight? John was wearing a $20,000 gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry. Why hadn't the thief searched the pockets as criminals usually do in these kinds of assaults? More questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene of the attack. This matched Judy's account of hearing 2 detonations. One of the shots ended John's life almost immediately, and as for the other, there was no official information. With their heads full of questions, the investigators began their work, and of course, the first person they took a statement from was Judy. She claimed that sometime before, her husband had had a heated argument with an employee of his company and identified the man. Beyond this, Judy could not provide anything more of interest beyond what she had said at the scene of the incident. Jeff was also not helpful. He was inside the office, and when he came out upon hearing the detonations, everything was already over. Meanwhile, the authorities contacted the Parker residence, and the call was answered by Christina, who was informed that her stepfather had passed away. With the robbery motive almost ruled out, detectives turned their focus towards John's circle, starting with the allegedly resentful employee. The man confirmed they had a significant argument but said it had been amicably resolved. Moreover, he had an alibi that was investigated and verified. The investigation then expanded to nearly everyone close to the young businessman. Business partners, past and current employees, competitors, and even John's friends and family. The only slightly suspicious finding was the interaction between the widow and the company's general manager, but there was no substantial evidence. Judy's demeanor during her husband's funeral was very intriguing. Comments mentioned Judy appearing cheerful and socializing with friends, in stark contrast to the expected mourning behavior. Her ex-husband, the father of her 2 children, was also noted to be comfortably reading a newspaper at the funeral. 4 days after John's murder, Daniel, 15, was brought in for questioning on suspicion of involvement. This suspicion was based on an incident 6 months prior, where police were alerted by gang members that Daniel had paid them to kill his stepfather, John. Although they said they never intended to follow through and had merely kept the money, the police deemed the story implausible, confiscating the money and filing a report without apparent further action. However, given John's eventual murder, investigators revisited Daniel's potential involvement. Under interrogation, Daniel confessed to paying individuals to harm John, intending not to kill but to injure him, like breaking his legs. Despite detaining one of the youth Daniel allegedly negotiated with, he was released due to a solid alibi verified by the investigation. Daniel was released after 9 days due to lack of substantial evidence and his minor status. Later, it was revealed that John had issues with Judy's children, leading to more investigation into Daniel and bringing to light suspicions about Judy's daughter, Christina, 17. Christina denied everything when questioned, and like before, the alleged plan led nowhere. Given that both teenagers had shown a desire to eliminate John, investigators wondered where the money for these schemes was coming from, suspecting Judy as the only possible source. Further inquiries revealed that the relationship between the couple had significantly deteriorated prior to John's death, with at least one of Judy's affairs coming to light. However, sources indicated that John had no intention of leaving his wife and was seeking ways to salvage the relationship. The primary motive for Judy to target her husband appeared to be financial, with detectives discovering John had 2 life insurance policies totaling $1 million. Judy had attempted to claim this money after her husband's death, but the insurance company initially refused to pay, citing the ongoing investigation into his death. The payment was further complicated by John's father, who suspected Judy's involvement in his son's demise. Despite these leads, the case eventually stalled, with only circumstantial evidence available. Life moved on, but significant changes occurred within the Parker family household. Judy was hardly ever home, apparently busy with her new partner, Jeff, John's trusted manager. In her absence, the older siblings took care of their younger half-sisters, Tiffany and Erica. Months later, Judy and Jeff decided to move out of state with John's younger daughters, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina remained in the house, now pregnant and with a boyfriend. Though the investigation had hit a dead end, authorities kept the case open, regularly revisiting the files in hopes of finding something substantial. Their persistence paid off when, following a new lead, they interrogated some schoolmates of Christina and Daniel, who admitted to selling them a firearm. This information led detectives to investigate a piece of family-owned land used by Christina for shooting practice. Upon inspecting the area, investigators indeed found several bullet casings. These findings were analyzed in laboratories, and a significant clue was discovered. The bullet casings matched those from John's crime scene. In 2007, additional information emerged through a colleague, a narcotics officer who had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, involved in a drug case and arrested. Seeking leniency in his case, the ex-boyfriend disclosed a conversation with Judy, in which she mentioned that it was her son Daniel who had fired the shot that ended John's life. Confronted with this information, 21-year-old Christina, linked to the weapon used in the crime, quickly began to talk. She admitted to purchasing the weapon and calling her parents on the night of the incident, asking them to stop by the office under the pretense of picking up forgotten homework. She confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When 19-year-old Daniel was located and detained in Arizona, he was presented with the new ballistics evidence and his sister's account. He readily admitted to being the one who shot John, but claimed that Judy, their mother, was the mastermind behind the plot. Daniel disclosed that Judy had forged company checks to gather the necessary funds to hire hitmen to kill John. The amount stolen was reportedly $7,500. However, when the initial plan fell through because the hired individuals took the money without completing the job, Judy allegedly instructed them to purchase the weapon for her son to use instead. Furthermore, Daniel revealed it was Judy's idea to create the pretext for leaving the house that night by making the call about the homework. He stated he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accidental discharge while he was rifling through John's pocket for his wallet, following his mother's instructions. He was also told to return home without alerting his younger sisters, a task facilitated by Christina, who kept the girls occupied with television. The siblings claimed their mother had convinced them to commit the crime by alleging they were victims of abuse by John and promising them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also revealed that this was not Judy's first attempt to kill her husband. She had previously tried to poison his food, leading only to a brief hospitalization for John under the guise of food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charge and was released on bail several months later in March 2008. Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge to kill his stepfather and made a deal to admit his guilt and implicate his mother in the crime. In exchange for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to charge him with the more serious offense of murder, although he would still face a sentence of 20 to 25 years in prison. Daniel claimed that nearly a year before the incident, when he was 14, his mother and sister first asked him to help kill John. He detailed that his mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, as well as providing him with black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do to carry out the grim task, including taking a thorough shower upon returning home to eliminate any traces of gunpowder. Ultimately, Judy took responsibility for disposing of the weapon, the clothes worn during the crime, and her husband's wallet. Facing the inevitable in July 2009, 6 years after her husband's death, Judy surrendered to the authorities and agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, acknowledging her role in planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution requested that she be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 28 years and a maximum of 35 years. Judy, nearing 40, was sentenced to 33 years in prison in late August 2009. The following month, Daniel was sentenced to 23 years, and in early October, Christina, who eventually pleaded guilty to aiding a criminal, received a 5-year sentence. Press reports indicate that Daniel was released in 2017 after participating in a community transition court program and chose to live a low-profile life thereafter. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but tragically, she died from a drug overdose shortly after her release. This case is marked by greed. Despite Judy's difficult early life and later success, her insatiable desire for more led her to commit heinous crimes. Sadly, her actions not only destroyed a successful entrepreneur, but also profoundly impacted her 4 children, leading 2 to prison and leaving the younger ones without their father and mother. Sarah Yarborough was born on June 12, 1975, in Portland. Her parents soon moved to another state, settling in Federal Way, a suburb outside of Seattle. Sarah had 2 siblings and was particularly close to her youngest brother. From a young age, she had a passion for music and ballet. She worked hard in school with the goal of attending a good university, Her academic achievements led her to participate in a school program that took her to New Zealand twice. Later on, Sarah joined her high school's cheerleading team and had a wide circle of friends. She was known for her kindness and willingness to help others in need. On the morning of Saturday, December 14, 1991, when she was 16 years old, Sarah had a gathering with her cheerleading team for an event. They were supposed to meet at the school building where the bus would pick them up. She drove her father's car to the school but arrived at the wrong time. She thought the bus would pick them up at 8 a.m., but it was scheduled for 9 a.m. Her friends gradually arrived at the meeting point, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. Some students noticed her car in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. She didn't appear even when the bus arrived for the students. Her friends found this strange, but back then, none of them had mobile phones, so they couldn't contact her. Around the same time, two 12-year-old children were walking on the school grounds, exploring the wooded area behind the tennis courts. They noticed something unusual. A man emerged from behind the bushes, took a breath, and walked away in the opposite direction. The children found it odd, but didn't pay much attention and continued walking. A few meters ahead, they encountered a horrifying sight. A young woman lying on the ground, unresponsive. They thought she might be dead. The children ran home to tell their parents, and one of the children's parents went back to the scene with them. The other child's father decided to follow the suspicious man they had seen earlier. The child mentioned seeing a car that resembled a Chevrolet Nova leaving the area. Since he lived near the school, his father decided to try to locate that car. At one point, he spotted a similar car but quickly lost sight of it, unable to find it again. Meanwhile, the parents of the other child went to the school and realized that the young woman on the ground was likely deceased. They immediately rushed to the school building and called the police. Officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that the young woman was indeed deceased. They were also able to quickly determine that the deceased was Sarah. The police concluded, based on the marks on her neck, that the victim had been strangled. Some of her belongings were found near her body, including her jacket, underwear, and socks. Strangely, her purse and car keys were discovered in the school parking lot, leading investigators to suspect that the assailant might have attacked her near her car and then dragged her behind the trees. The body was handed over to forensic experts, and the police began their search for clues. Their initial step was to interview all the people who were in the school premises and its vicinity. Two boys who had found Sarah provided a rough description of the man who had emerged from behind the bushes near her body. They described him as a tall man around 20 years old, with shoulder-length reddish hair, dressed in a dark coat and black pants. Soon, the police managed to locate another witness, and here is where a surprising twist in the story unfolds. The man who had gone for a run observed a strange scene in the same wooded area. A girl was lying next to the bushes, and a man was hovering over her. The girl showed no movement at all, and the witness initially thought that a couple had decided to be intimate in that spot. A few minutes later, he ran on the same road in the opposite direction, and both the man and the girl were still there. In both instances, it did not appear to him that a serious crime was being committed. The witness explained to the police that he had recently immigrated to the United States from another culture and was unsure of the typical behavior in the country. Nevertheless, this witness provided the police with a rough description of the assailant, which matched the descriptions given by the children who discovered the body. Investigators interviewed dozens of people who had been near the school but did not find any other useful leads. Meanwhile, medical experts examined Sarah's body and concluded that the cause of her death was strangulation. Apparently, the assailant had used his own socks, and a severe head wound was also found on the girl. Experts believe that the victim had lost consciousness due to this blow, which aligned with the runner's account of seeing the girl lying motionless on the ground. Forensic experts examined Sarah's clothing and found traces of male particles on nearly all of her garments. However, in 1991, there was no DNA database to compare these samples to, so investigators could only rely on direct comparisons of DNA samples from specific suspects. There was another lead that detectives pointed out, although forensic experts found traces of male particles on Sarah's clothing. The forensic doctor stated that there were no signs of sexual assault on her body. With all this information in hand, investigators formed their own opinion of what had happened. Sarah had arrived at the school nearly an hour early, and there was no one else in the parking lot but her. It was most likely that her assailant saw her there, waited for her to exit the car, struck her in the head with an object, causing her to lose consciousness. He then dragged her out of the parking lot behind some trees, where her body would later be found. The assailant had removed some of her clothing and engaged in lewd acts before strangling her with her own socks. When one of the children who discovered Sarah's body reported the car in which the assailant had supposedly fled, detectives initiated a search for a Chevrolet Nova. They quickly found one, but it turned out that the driver of that car had just delivered donuts that morning and provided his DNA sample, which did not match the DNA found on Sarah's clothing. It appeared that the children had simply seen the vehicle driving on the road next to them and mistakenly thought the perpetrator was behind the wheel. In fact, none of the children could remember with exact certainty if they had seen a man approach a car from the bushes. Over the following days, the police officers continued to search for witnesses and new leads, but there were no significant breakthroughs. Classes resumed on Monday, despite the horror that had occurred. Apart from the fact that the murder had taken place just a few meters from their school, the perpetrator remained at large, and his identity was unknown. The girls were afraid to walk alone on the premises, so the boys from the sports teams took it upon themselves to accompany each female student to their car or bus to ensure they weren't left alone on the street. Investigators learned that there were approximately 70 potential witnesses of the school and its surroundings that morning, and they interviewed each one of them, but no new details emerged. Based on the accounts of the two children and the runner, a sketch of the assailant was created and distributed to all local newspapers and television stations. The story received extensive media coverage, and in the weeks that followed, the police received hundreds of tips. Investigators diligently checked each and every one of them, but in every case, they hit a dead end. At one point, they received a lead on a man who matched the murder suspect's description and had a criminal record. However, the detectives were unsuccessful in this lead as well, as his DNA did not match the sample found on the victim's clothing. Since then, the case remained stagnant for months. The police received a total of 4,000 different tips and attempted to work with each one of them, but the resources of the local police department were simply insufficient to handle the volume of information. Time was also working against them, as new cases required the investigators' attention every month. When Sarah's family discovered that the police lacked the resources to manage all the tips, they tried to help as much as they could. One family member worked for a technology company and convinced the company's management to temporarily provide the police department with a powerful computer valued at $150,000. In the 1990s, this was a substantial sum, but the company agreed. With this computer, the police could store information on all the leads in one place, process them more quickly, and categorize them for easy review. Despite their efforts, each lead led to a dead end, and they made no progress in the following years. 2 years later, Sarah's classmates graduated, and before their graduation, they decided to commemorate their friend by raising a significant amount of money and using it to create a memorial. It was a bench where Sarah's belongings were cast in metal. Alongside these items was a photo of the girl's dog reaching for her purse. Over the years, the case was periodically reopened, re-examining all available evidence, but the outcome remained the same. they still couldn't get closer to capturing the perpetrator. During this time, the police interviewed several thousand people and collected DNA samples from almost 300 possible suspects, but all efforts were in vain. In 2011, 20 years after the murder, one of the detectives decided to turn to modern technology. He had heard about a company working in the field of genetic genealogy. The detective contacted them and asked, "Can you try to locate the relatives of the person who left their DNA on the victim's body?" The experts took on the task, but unfortunately, they failed. Firstly, in 2011, genetic genealogy was just beginning to gain momentum, and the experts were limited in their capabilities. For example, they couldn't yet search for both male and female relatives within the same sample. If they had DNA from a man, they could only search for familial connections with other men, and vice versa. Secondly, they faced legal obstacles in the form of various laws that prohibited the use of genetic data samples to search for relatives of suspects. However, their efforts did yield some interesting results. On one hand, the team of researchers that the detective approached have been working for several years on creating a genetic pedigree of the first people who arrived in the United States from Britain in 1620 on the Mayflower. After studying the DNA of Sarah's assailant, they discovered that the man was related to one of the ship's passengers, Robert Fuller. However, tracking him through this lineage was nearly impossible, especially in those years. The Mayflower carried just over 100 people, but over the centuries, the number of their descendants has surpassed 25 million. Secondly, the detective had no idea that he had turned Sarah's case into the first of its kind, even though his initial attempt was unsuccessful. It was the first crime that was attempted to be solved with the help of genetic genealogy. The detective tried to utilize the available information and located several men with the last name Fuller who lived in the area of his city at the time of Sarah's murder. He found photos of them and met with the only witnesses, a runner and two men who had found the body when they were children. Unfortunately, none of them recognized the murderer from the photos. Finally, the investigator requested DNA samples from all the Fullers in the area, and they were sent to the laboratory. None of them matched the DNA of the assailant, but something interesting happened here. The experts discovered that one of these men was indeed a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from the same Mayflower ship. However, he was definitely not the murderer, nor did he know of any distant relative living nearby. It's possible that the perpetrator of the crime was related to him through such a distant relative that their family simply never knew of the connection. The detective retired in 2017, and the case was handed over to a new team of investigators. They reached out to the company that had taken over the study of the DNA sample from the assailant in 2011. By then, the capability to study genetic material had advanced significantly, and the experts agreed to try to trace the assailant's lineage. It took them 2 years of painstaking work, using public databases to find even the most distant relatives of the assailant, then manually tracing their family connections to individuals who lived during the time of Sarah's death. In total, they had to eliminate several thousand individuals before they finally got a break. In September 2019, they came up with 2 new possible suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who, as the DNA showed, were descendants of Robert Fuller. The experts determined that it was highly likely that a DNA sample from Sarah's clothing belonged to one of 2 brothers. At the time of the murder, one was 33 years old and the other was 27. The older brother turned out to be a career criminal with an extensive history of violent offenses. He had been in prison, and his DNA sample was in the FBI database, which meant he had nothing to do with Sarah's murder because his DNA would have shown a match in the 1990s if he were the perpetrator. As for the younger brother, named Patrick Nicholas, he had also been arrested multiple times by the police for violent crimes, including against minors. However, this was before the DNA samples of such offenders were added to the database. The detectives immediately placed the man under surveillance. Patrick, who was 55 years old at the time, lived in a neighboring city called Wellington. The police had been following his every move for 2 days, and soon an opportunity presented itself. Patrick went to the laundromat, and while waiting for his clothes to wash, he stepped outside to smoke and discarded a cigarette butt on the ground. One of the officers immediately collected it in an evidence bag and returned to his car. Patrick stepped out to smoke for a second time, and this time, a cloth handkerchief fell out of his pocket. The officers picked it up. The police settled for taking the second piece of evidence in case the experts couldn't extract a DNA sample from the cigarette butt. However, the forensic experts were able to easily obtain samples from all these items, and the following day, they delivered the long-awaited news to the detective. Patrick's DNA was a perfect match with the traces found on Sarah's clothing in 1991. The judge immediately issued an arrest warrant for the man, and the police took him into custody. It took 5 days for the investigators to ascertain his name before formally charging him with murder. When his biography was leaked to the media, many began to ask a perfectly logical question. Why was a man with such a history of criminal activity not even considered a suspect for all these 28 years? At the age of 19, Patrick Nicholas approached a young woman and got into her car, where he attempted to assault her. The victim managed to escape and flee, but she had to jump into a river and swim for a long time to reach a safe distance from her assailant. Patrick spent 4 years in prison before being released. The next offense for which he was arrested occurred in 1994 when he tried to assault a minor. He was detained again, but his DNA was not recorded in any database. The reason is peculiar. The charge for which he was prosecuted was not serious enough to collect DNA, and the police never came across his name in 3 decades. He also did not appear in any of the 4,000 leads obtained over the years. It was also revealed why genetic genealogy experts couldn't trace him back to Robert Fuller. It turned out that Patrick's biological lineage was adopted, and he grew up with the adoptive surname. One of the men who discovered Sarah's body when they were children in 1991 immediately asserted that Patrick was undoubtedly the same killer. He admitted that the incident had deeply affected him. He was only 12 years old when the body was discovered, and the perpetrator had seen his face. For many years, the witness lived in constant fear that the killer would come after him, and only after Patrick's arrest did he finally feel safe. Patrick's trial did not begin until 2023. The man insisted he was innocent, and his lawyer attempted to challenge the main piece of evidence, the DNA. He argued that the presence of Patrick's DNA on the victim's clothing did not prove his guilt, but that argument did not hold. The lawyer also tried to challenge the accuracy of the DNA analysis, but the experts declared such claims to be entirely untenable. Ultimately, Patrick was found guilty of first-degree murder without premeditation. On May 25th, he was sentenced to 45 years and 8 months in prison, making it virtually impossible for him to ever be released. During the sentencing, Patrick showed no emotion, unlike Sarah's family. They also spoke before the judge, thanking everyone involved in the trial and the investigators for bringing the killer to justice, despite his ability to elude it for 28 years. With a population of just under 14,000, New Franklin is a small town located in Ohio. It's known for Edgewater State Park and the historic Tudor House. The town boasts stunning views, offering its residents a peaceful, rural experience paired with a relatively affordable cost of living. The people of New Franklin are famous for their friendliness, which gives the town its unique charm. It's also recognized as being 61% safer than other U.S. cities, frequently ranking among the top 100 safest cities in the country. That's why the tragic death of Ashley Biggs shook the community so deeply. Ashley Biggs was born on January 9, 1987, in New Franklin, Ohio. She was an only child, raised by her mother, Kimberly Biggs, and her stepfather. Those who knew Ashley described her as a kind, gentle soul, always smiling and full of joy. She was surrounded by a loving family, and at the age of 17, she met Chad Cobb, a 25-year-old man, during a double date at a local skating rink. They fell in love and began a serious relationship, eventually moving in together. A year later, they welcomed a daughter. However, the relationship between Ashley and Chad began to deteriorate. Friends claimed that Chad was abusive, often hitting her. Shortly after their breakup in 2008, Ashley enlisted in the U.S. Army, giving Chad full custody of their daughter. Unfortunately, Ashley was medically discharged due to her severe asthma and returned home to work as a pizza delivery driver for Domino's in Akron, Ohio. She had also started a new relationship with a woman named Brittany Dunson, and they planned to raise her daughter together. After a lengthy legal battle, Ashley was awarded full custody of her daughter, which angered Chad. He began threatening Ashley and Brittany, leading Ashley to obtain a restraining order against him. On the night of June 20th, 2012, around 11:42 p.m., a late pizza order came into the Domino's branch in Akron. The caller, identifying herself as Jenny, ordered a half pepperoni, half mushroom pizza. Ashley, working that night, decided to make the delivery. The address was located in a commercial area of New Franklin, and she was instructed to deliver the pizza at the back of the building. Ashley left just before midnight, and the staff expected her back within minutes, as the delivery was nearby and the streets were quiet. However, over an hour passed with no sign of her return. Concerned, her manager called Brittany, who hadn't heard from Ashley either. The manager then contacted the New Franklin police to report Ashley missing. Officers arrived at Domino's around 1 a.m. to gather information. Just as they were speaking with the staff, Brittany arrived, visibly worried. She informed the officers about Ashley's troubled past with her ex, Chad. Police assured her that they would search for Ashley and headed to the delivery address on a dark and secluded area. The business there was clearly closed, but in the parking lot they discovered a large pool of blood and scattered coins. It was no longer just a missing person case. Investigators believed that Ashley had been lured to the parking lot and ambushed, possibly by someone familiar with her schedule. They immediately began questioning Brittany, who revealed the intense custody battle between Ashley and Chad and the restraining order Ashley had recently filed. Brittany was certain that Chad needed to be questioned. Police checked their records and discovered Chad's history of violence against Ashley, including an assault charge from 7 years earlier. Early in the morning on June 21st, investigators arrived at Chad's house but received no response. However, a background check revealed that he owned a black SUV, registered to an address about half a mile from the delivery site. Officers went to the new address, which belonged to Chad's grandparents. There, they found a black vehicle parked behind the property. When they approached the vehicle, they found a woman and 4 children inside. It was Chad's new wife, Erica. She was taken into custody, and the children were handed over to family members. As officers searched the property, they heard noises coming from a wooded area behind the barn. A search team ventured into the darkness and soon found Chad hiding in the woods, wearing camouflage. His clothes were stained with blood. Chad and Erica both refused to cooperate, but police were now certain something horrific had occurred. A search of the surrounding woods turned up a backpack containing a large knife, a neoprene mask, gloves, a taser, duct tape, and industrial zip ties, all near the area where Chad had been hiding. Blood traces were found on several of the items, deepening the suspicion of a brutal attack. It seemed like a dead end for the investigators, but they were on the verge of a breakthrough. After this discovery, they used helicopters and dive teams to search for any trace of Ashley or her vehicle. Despite their efforts, it seemed they had hit a roadblock until they received a call from a woman in a neighboring county. The anonymous caller mentioned that her house, situated on a hill, overlooked a cornfield. She had woken up and noticed something shiny near the edge of the field. Fearing that something suspicious was happening, she contacted the police. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found an SUV. It matched the description of Ashley Biggs' vehicle. As they inspected the interior, they discovered the body of a woman lying in the back seat. The scene was horrific. The victim had been bound at the wrists and ankles with industrial zip ties, and another zip tie was fastened around her neck. Her face had turned purple from lack of oxygen, and several taser wires were still embedded in her skin. She appeared to have been severely beaten as well. The woman was still wearing a pizza delivery uniform. Inside the car, there was an insulated pizza delivery bag and the untouched pizza from Ashley's last order. Investigators also found stickers from the deliveries made that night attached to the steering wheel. The body was removed and taken to the county coroner's office for proper identification. Investigators called Ashley's mother and asked if her daughter had any identifying tattoos. Kimberly confirmed that Ashley had 2 stars on the back of each arm and a tattoo on her navel. It was enough to verify that the body was indeed Ashley Biggs. Chad was arrested under suspicion of murder and refused to cooperate with investigators. He was taken into custody at the county jail. Erica, Chad's new wife, was allowed to return home as there was no direct evidence linking her to Ashley's death at the time. On June 22, 2012, the chief medical examiner performed Ashley's autopsy. She determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation from the zip tie around her neck. The victim also showed signs of blunt force trauma to the scalp, face, and body, along with defensive wounds on her wrists and hands. Blood samples from Ashley were compared to the stains found on Chad's clothing and tools. It was a match. Following Chad's arrest, Ashley's family and friends opened up to investigators about the years of abuse she had endured. Brittany, Ashley's partner, revealed that Chad had started stalking and harassing both women after Ashley was awarded full custody of their daughter. He had threatened them with violence, enraged by the loss of custody and Ashley's new life. On June 24, 2012, Chad was formally charged and arrested for murder. His bail was set at $1.5 million. During his hearing, Chad was informed that he would face the death penalty. However, he later accepted a plea deal on multiple charges, including aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. On February 26, 2013, Chad pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although the case seemed closed, one detail lingered in investigators' minds. A woman had placed the pizza order. They suspected Chad needed help transporting the vehicle to the cornfield, and their suspicions pointed toward Erica. However, there was no concrete evidence linking her to the crime at that time. During the initial investigation, officers had made an interesting discovery. They found a receipt from a local store for the purchase of a prepaid phone on June 20, 2012. Surveillance footage showed Chad, Erica, and their children leaving the store. Still, this wasn't enough to prove Erica's involvement in the murder. Erica moved on with her life after Chad's arrest. She filed for divorce and began a relationship with Chad's childhood friend, Christopher Michael Stefanko. Erica and Mike married and had a baby shortly after Chad's sentencing. However, Chad wasn't pleased with the changes around him, particularly Erica's new life. Though Erica initially brought the children to visit Chad in prison, those visits dwindled as her new marriage progressed, and eventually they stopped altogether. Around this time, Ashley's daughter began writing letters to her father in prison. In her letters, she described the emotional, physical, and mental abuse she was enduring at the hands of Erica. She spoke of how unhappy she was living with her stepmother in the new family. Chad, growing more frustrated, finally decided to tell the truth after 4 years in prison. In an unexpected move, he wrote a letter to the police. In it, he confessed that it was Erica who made the pizza order under the alias Jenny, and revealed that Erica had masterminded the plot. He also told the police that his mother had evidence that could help the case. This was the break the detectives had been waiting for. They contacted Chad's mother, who agreed to meet with them on January 2, 2018, nearly 6 years after Ashley's murder. She handed over a recording of a conversation she had with Erica 2 years after the murder, in March 2014. In the recording, Erica openly discussed the killing and admitted that she was not forced by Chad to lure Ashley with the fake pizza order. When asked why she recorded the conversation, she said it was as insurance for her son, Chad. The investigators realized that Erica had not only made an enemy out of Chad, but also his mother, as Erica had started keeping Chad's children away from their grandmother, which had created tension between them. Piecing everything together, investigators concluded the following events led to Ashley Biggs's murder. After losing custody of his daughter, Chad became increasingly resentful of Ashley and her new lifestyle. He and Erica conspired to lure Ashley into a trap to silence her. Erica made the call to Domino's on that fateful night, knowing Ashley was on delivery duty. She provided an address in a quiet part of town with little traffic at that hour. Erica then drove herself, the children, and Chad to the location to wait for Ashley. As Ashley arrived at the back of the building where she was instructed to meet the caller, Chad ambushed her with a taser, leaving her defenseless. He tied her hands and feet before viciously beating her into unconsciousness. After the brutal assault, he strangled her with a zip tie. Chad then dragged Ashley back to her car and had Erica and the children follow him to the cornfield where they abandoned her vehicle. Erica later drove Chad back to his grandparents' house, where police would eventually find him. Now armed with Chad's confession, investigators prepared to build a case against Erica. However, it would prove difficult because the man accusing her was her resentful ex-husband, who had already taken the blame for the murder. Yet, in the recording, Erica admitted to being involved in the killing and even assisting in it. On November 11, 2019, Erica was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. The prosecution faced an uphill battle as they worked to build a strong case against her. They focused on complicity law, arguing that without Erica's help, Chad wouldn't have been able to carry out the murder. This legal strategy ensured that both Erica and Chad would be held accountable for Ashley's murder, regardless of their respective roles. The prosecution also relied on character witness testimonies from individuals who knew about the conflict between Ashley, Chad, and Erica. A year after Erica's arrest, she was put on trial for her involvement in Ashley Biggs' murder. During opening statements, the prosecution argued that Erica was a key player in the crime and that, without her, it wouldn't have happened. They reminded the jury that under the law, anyone who aids, abets, encourages, or associates with another in committing a crime is just as guilty as the principal offender. In contrast, the defense focused on Chad, claiming that he was using this as a way to reduce his own sentence and secure an early release date. They painted him as someone who, after 8 years, suddenly decided to implicate Erica for his own benefit. Chad testified remotely about Erica's role in the murder, claiming for the first time that Erica was the one who strangled Ashley. His daughter was also called to the stand, testifying about her relationship with Erica and the abuse she endured. She recounted both good and bad memories with Erica, describing psychological and physical mistreatment, including an incident where Erica forced her to eat dog food. After hearing all the testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 days. On November 25, 2020, they returned to court and found Erica guilty of aggravated murder, though she was acquitted of the aggravated robbery and kidnapping charges. In July 2021, Erica was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. After her sentencing, Erica addressed Ashley's familia, saying she would gladly accept any blame if it brought them peace. In July 2022, Erica's conviction was overturned after the Court of Appeals ruled that her rights had been violated due to Chad's remote testimony, which was conducted because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Chad had testified from a separate courtroom, which the court deemed a violation of Erica's constitutional right to a fair trial. A new trial date has yet to be set. In December 2022, Erica requested a reduction in her bail while awaiting a new trial. Prosecutors argued that Erica posed a significant flight risk, given her previous conviction for aggravated murder. The judge upheld Erica's original $2 million bail, and she remains in jail awaiting her new trial. Chad and Erica's children are left grappling with the cruelty of their parents' actions, knowing that their decisions destroyed countless lives around them. They, like their half-sister, now grow up without the guidance of either parent. Maria Cash, the sole daughter in a family of 4 siblings, was a resident of the Barracas neighborhood in Buenos Aires. She was born on December 5, 1981, and enjoyed a blissful childhood with her parents, Federico and Maria del Carmen, along with her brothers Maximo, Patricio, and Santiago. From a tender age, she grasped the significance of friendship when she crossed paths with a girl named Carolina at the age of 6, forging a bond that would endure a lifetime. Subsequently, during their 3rd year of high school, Maria and her best friend Carolina welcomed another addition to their circle, Mariana, who seamlessly became an inseparable part of their group. Maria's social circle was characterized by its quality rather than quantity. Although she maintained amicable relations with her family, she bore the reputation of a rather solitary individual. Even when surrounded by people, she possessed the unique ability to disconnect and revel in solitude. As she matured and gained more independence, whenever she yearned for solitude, she would simply decide to retreat in a coastal city in Argentina known for its pristine beaches, distinctive architectural beauty, and abundant pine forests. Upon arriving, she routinely switched off her cell phone, leaving her friends and family without news of her for several days. Maria developed her talents as a designer and took charge of selling the clothing she crafted. Additionally, she was involved in the sales and promotion of various products. In contrast to her preference for solitude and moments of introspection, Maria displayed a warm and courteous demeanor towards others. Acquaintances frequently remarked on her perpetual smile and serene countenance, making her a delightful presence to be around. Her lively and energetic nature added to her charm. Carolina and Mariana portrayed her as a free spirit with a deep affinity for nature. They emphasized that she lived a modest existence, but consistently extended invitations to dine with her friends and never forgot to mark their birthdays, even if it meant gifting them with a handmade flower. Nevertheless, Carolina also noted Maria's enigmatic side. At some point during her youth, Maria joined a spiritual group, a religious movement centered on self-realization. This pursuit resonated deeply with her, as it provided a platform for meditation exercises aimed at achieving inner peace. While seemingly incongruous to outsiders, this spiritual practice held profound meaning for her,
accentuating her inherently spiritual and tranquil disposition. Maria's involvement in the group, along with the enigmatic inner circle she cultivated within the group, remained shrouded in secrecy from her friends and family. Despite its fundamental role in her life, she limited her disclosures to the fact that she dedicated extensive hours to meditation in pursuit of self-awareness. It was within the realms of this group that Maria crossed paths with Juan Pablo, a teacher, proprietor of a restaurant, and government employee in Hugue. He resided at the picturesque town located 13 kilometers to the north of San Salvador de Hugue. Over time, Juan Pablo and Maria's friendship deepened to a point where their closeness sparked speculations among both acquaintances and family members. Mariana and Carolina recalled Maria's glowing remarks about him. In late June 2011, Maria confided in her friends, expressing her desire to journey to Hugue to promote her products, a decision that raised eyebrows, considering the considerable distance and geographical separation from the capital. Maria meticulously orchestrated her trip to Hugue, veiling the true purpose from everyone, or at least weaving 3 different narratives. She casually mentioned her intention to rest, to sell some of her handmade garments, and even claimed that a friend had extended a job offer at a bar in Hugue. During a phone call in the presence of her friends, she cryptically mentioned a job opportunity from a Hugue-based friend without divulging further details. She outlined her plans to depart in July and return to Buenos Aires by December. In the days preceding her journey, Maria convened with her friends for a dinner gathering at Mariana's residence. That night, she shared an overwhelming desire to spread the love of God among people. She carried a Bible brimming with highlighted passages, marking a newfound religiosity, as per Mariana's recollection. In reference to her voyage to Hugue, Federico Cash, her father, explained that she sought serenity and opted for a destination devoid of the chaos of the capital. She had informed him about a job offer at a friend's bar. On July 4, Maria commenced her journey and at 7:30 p.m. left her home, packing minimally, indicating her intention to be away for just a few days. Her father, Federico, accompanied her to the bus terminal, where she was set to board a bus destined for San Salvador de Hugue, scheduled to arrive around 6 p.m. the following day. Little did he know that it would be the last time he saw her alive. Somewhere along the journey, an event occurred that remains shrouded in ambiguity to this day, lacking clarity in its entirety. What is unequivocal is that on July 5, Maria made an unexpected decision to disembark in Rosario de la Frontera, a town situated in the province of Salta. This deviation from the plan caught everyone by surprise. In subsequent communications with her family and her friend Juan Pablo, she vaguely alluded to her discomfort with certain fellow passengers, citing an unpleasant experience during the bus ride. However, she refrained from disclosing the true nature of the situation. Standing by the roadside, Maria resorted to hitchhiking and ventured southward until she reached Santiago del Estero. None of these detours aligned with her original itinerary. Nevertheless, after reconnecting with her friend Juan Pablo and disclosing her financial predicament, she resolved to resume her journey. He generously offered to purchase her a bus ticket online, enabling her to continue her voyage to Hugue. Maria eventually arrived in Hugue in the early hours of Wednesday, July 6. During her stay there, she contacted Juan Pablo from a local mechanic's workshop where she had borrowed a phone. Juan Pablo's sister answered the call, informing her that he was occupied with work and couldn't personally pick her up. Instead, she suggested taking a taxi, with the assurance that they would cover the fare upon her arrival. Subsequently, all communication with Maria ceased. When Juan Pablo returned home, he found her absent. At approximately 4:30 am, he sent her numerous messages, urging her to either visit her grandmother's house or one of his own restaurants. He provided detailed addresses and insisted on covering the taxi fare, but received neither a response nor her arrival. Around 2 p.m., the young woman was spotted once more, attempting to hitchhike along Route 34. During that afternoon, she conversed with her family, revealing that she had depleted her funds and was feeling unwell, yet she refrained from divulging further details. On the night of July 6, she was captured on video passing through a toll booth. Notably, she was without her suitcase but carried a backpack. Remarkably, the same backpack seen in the footage was discovered by toll booth employees who chose to retain it and eventually handed it over to the police several days later. According to some accounts of the case, on July 7, Maria sought medical attention at a hospital in Salta. However, as the medical examination was about to commence, she opted to depart. Witnesses attested to her appearing disoriented and erratic, as if she lacked a clear sense of direction or purpose. Her overall appearance was somewhat disheveled. Nevertheless, she did manage to consult a pulmonologist in downtown San Salvador de Jujuy. He charged her 100 pesos for the consultation and prescribed medication for a respiratory issue. In contrast to the descriptions provided by those who encountered her at the hospital, the pulmonologist asserted that she exhibited perfect lucidity, cleanliness, and neatness. These conflicting reports presented a perplexing challenge for investigators. On the same day, July 7, she embarked on a journey to Salta. A truck driver who had previously seen her in Pampa Blanca, Jujuy, confirmed encountering her while walking along a street in downtown Salta. Another woman also observed her in the vicinity, seemingly in search of a craft store that included a gym on its upper floor. Around 5 p.m., from an internet cafe in that city, Maria sent an email to her brothers, requesting their phone numbers. In the email, she expressed her desire to return to Buenos Aires, citing the loss of her belongings. Regrettably, the communication abruptly terminated, instilling concern within her family. Consequently, they promptly made the decision to report her disappearance, filing a formal complaint at a police station in Salta. Fearing the worst, her father and one of her brothers opted to embark on a car journey to Jujuy. Nonetheless, their efforts to locate her proved futile, as she had already moved on from the area. It appears that on July 8th, Maria engaged in an unexpected encounter at the toll booth. She boarded a van driven by a producer and former councilman from the Salta locality. He transported her to the roundabout, where Maria once again solicited a new ride. This time, she succeeded in securing a ride from a truck driver heading to Route 34. Witnesses who encountered her in that vicinity attested to her appearing bewildered and disoriented. She disembarked at a religious pilgrimage site and was spotted in the vicinity of the sanctuary at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Following this moment, all trace of her vanished. Right from the outset, Maria's family pointed out numerous shortcomings in the investigation. For an initial period of 8 months, the case was categorized as a mere disappearance, with the Salta judicial system overseeing the inquiry. However, in early 2012, Maria's father lodged a report suggesting the possibility of human trafficking. Consequently, the case and its investigation were transferred to the federal prosecutor's office in Salta. The investigation proved to be an intricate puzzle due to the abundance of false leads, some motivated by ill intent and others stemming from genuine concern. Furthermore, Maria's physical description was rather commonplace. A young woman of slender build, average height, with dark hair and eyes. These particulars aligned with the characteristics of countless individuals, resulting in a deluge of incoming calls that ultimately led the investigation astray, as these leads failed to yield any substantive progress. One of the most perplexing aspects that impeded the search was the uncertainty surrounding Maria's intended destination. She underwent 3 transfers across different provinces, introducing an additional layer of complexity. A multitude of lineups, extensive interrogations, consultations, and inspections were conducted, all to no avail. Additionally, 2 extensive search operations were carried out in the region and along Route 34, in an endeavor to eliminate the possibility that she had ventured into the wilderness to spend the night or, alternatively, had fallen victim to a crime along the highway. Speculation even arose that she might have boarded another bus and journeyed to a different region of the country. As the months elapsed, the hypothesis of human trafficking began to wane. Maria's age did not conform to the typical profile sought by human traffickers, who typically target adolescents or significantly younger women. Nevertheless, it was never entirely dismissed, with investigators pivoting their focus toward the potential occurrence of a psychotic episode. Remarkably, in the testimony provided, Maria was portrayed as being poorly dressed, disheveled, and seemingly adrift. She embarked on and disembarked from buses, engaged in hitchhiking, and had even misplaced her identification documents. Contradictorily, Juan Pablo, one of the last individuals to converse with her, recounted that during their telephone exchanges, she exhibited a sense of normalcy, offering no indication of being disconnected from reality or under the influence of substances. There was no discernible sense of fear or urgency in her voice, nor did it seem like she was evading anyone. He emphasized that their conversation flowed like any ordinary exchange between friends. However, he did acknowledge two aspects that struck him: her admission of having no money and her decision to head to Jujuy without confirming his presence there. He described Maria as an exceptional person, noting that he had never known her to grapple with substance dependencies. He expressed astonishment at her sudden visit to Jujuy because they had lost touch for a considerable period, and out of the blue, she called to inform him of her presence there. Simultaneously with the official investigation, Maria's family pursued their search independently. They frequently voiced their frustration with the sluggish pace of the police investigation and the lack of tangible progress. After her disappearance, they engaged in conversations with numerous truck drivers, shopkeepers, neighbors, and law enforcement officers. Across these cities, they disseminated flyers bearing her photograph and contact information for individuals who might possess pertinent information. It was reported that they gathered more than 4,000 leads, yet the overwhelming majority proved to be either false or malicious. Maria's friend, Juan Pablo, also conducted his own inquiries. They combed through police stations, private clinics, public hospitals, and forensic facilities. The police conducted extensive searches and explored numerous theories, yet with time, most of these leads were discounted. Maria's friends even contemplated the possibility that she might have experienced a psychological episode during which she lost self-recognition, track of time, or fell victim to drugging followed by abduction. Nonetheless, these notions remained firmly within the realm of conjecture due to the absence of concrete evidence. Within this context, it is noteworthy that the relentless search conducted by the Cash family did not go unrewarded. While it did not yield Maria's whereabouts, it did lead to the discovery of other women who had fallen prey to criminal organizations engaged in human trafficking. These women had been ensnared in various locations and were ultimately rescued, thanks to the Cash family's endeavors in sharing their stories with the authorities. Amidst this unyielding pursuit, tragedy befell the family once more. In 2014, during one of their numerous journeys across the country in pursuit of any trace or lead, Maria's father tragically lost his life in a traffic accident in La Pampa. He had ventured there to distribute flyers bearing his daughter's visage. Several weeks following his passing, his wife received a phone call that rekindled her determination, faith, and optimism to continue the fight. Pope Francis extended his condolences for her husband's demise, expressing his heartfelt sorrow. In response, she wrote a letter of gratitude, wherein she conveyed how the Holy Father's compassionate words had filled her heart with love and rekindled the faith and hope that had dwindled from her life nearly 3 years earlier, alongside the disappearance of her daughter. Following Maria's father's tragic passing, his children persisted in their quest to locate Maria. Yet, as is often the case in disappearance investigations, they appeared trapped in a labyrinth, devoid of new leads to guide them. Then, in 2018, a significant development emerged when human remains, including a skull, were discovered in the Bolivian city of Oruro. There was hope that these remains might provide answers about the fate of the young designer, and this possibility garnered extensive media coverage. However, subsequent DNA analysis conclusively ruled out any connection to Maria. The Salta judiciary confirmed that the DNA extracted from the recovered remains did not match that of the Cash family, whose samples had been collected in Salta. Consequently, the mystery surrounding Maria's disappearance persisted, much like it did at the outset of the investigation. In that same year, 2018, a woman named Julia came forward, alleging physical abuse and cruel treatment, and implicating her ex-husband, a prison guard, in Maria's disappearance. She claimed to have witnessed Maria alive and held captive within a human trafficking network, at least until 2013, 2 years after her initial disappearance. Julia's attorney stated that, according to his client's testimony, these women were confined in a piece of land with rented infrastructure. While this lead was diligently pursued, it too failed to yield the discovery of Maria. The subsequent year, in September 2019, as part of this renewed investigative approach, search operations were conducted in an area known as Las Palomitas in Salta, based on information provided by an anonymous witness. Regrettably, these searches produced no results that could advance the investigation. In November 2020, forensic experts released an updated image of Maria Cash, employing age progression techniques. The intention behind this effort was to assist in her potential identification and to prompt new leads. Maria's family expressed hope that this initiative would yield fruitful results. However, once more, these endeavors proved unfruitful. In a succinct recapitulation of the case's progression, in 2023, certain Argentine media outlets revisited the topic of Maria's disappearance. They underscored that during the early years of the search, numerous leads were pursued, and a plethora of hypotheses were formulated. However, as time passed, these trails gradually dissipated, and the prospects of locating her dwindled. Nonetheless, the authorities remained steadfast in asserting that the search had never been abandoned. Marianne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in Sarstedt, West Germany. Her family ended up there following the public persecution and scrutiny her father faced for being a former official of the German National Socialist Party. During World War II, he was a member of the notorious SS. As a result, Marianne was raised in a very conservative home by deeply religious tutors. It's said that she never had a happy childhood due to a lack of close relationship with her parents. Her father was authoritarian, abusive, and an alcoholic, often spending more time at a bar near their home than with his family. Marianne's mother was also distant, rarely speaking or spending time with her daughter. The situation worsened due to her father's drinking, which increased his aggression towards the family. This ended with the parents' divorce and the father leaving the house. Marianne thought she could finally be free and happy, but soon her mother remarried another abusive man. Unfortunately, instead of Marianne and her mother uniting against the man, they both turned against Marianne, blaming her for the family's problems. This broke their relationship, and Marianne, seen as a troublesome teenager, was eventually kicked out of the house. During her adolescence, Marianne faced multiple assaults from different men, leading to the birth of her first child at just 16. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption due to lack of resources and because the baby's father abandoned her. 2 years later, Marianne got pregnant again by her then abusive boyfriend. Despite the circumstances, she wanted to keep the baby, but before the child's birth, she experienced another traumatic assault at a nightclub. Her boyfriend left her, and she gave up this second child for adoption as well. Later, Marianne dropped out of school and sought work to support herself. She started working at a bar named Tipasa, where she met the manager, and after some time, they became a couple. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child and felt ready to raise the baby with some resources and a home. However, her then boyfriend disagreed with her decision, ending their relationship. Marianne, firm in her choice, decided to raise her daughter, Anna, alone, despite her parents' demands to give her up for adoption like her previous children. After Anna's birth, Marianne vowed to be a good mother and underwent a tubal ligation, a common practice at the time to prevent overpopulation. Marianne and Anna lived together in Lubec, Germany, and despite challenges, they made it through. Indeed, Marianne was happy because her daughter was the only person in her life who did not intend to harm her, unlike her parents or ex-partners. However, raising Anna alone meant Marianne had to take her to work at the bar, so she could only attend to her daughter during her few breaks. Years later, people close to Marianne would say that she treated Anna like a little adult and expected her to take care of many things on her own from a young age. Anna often slept in the bar while Marianne was working, and a friend described Anna as a very vibrant and creative child who unfortunately never had a pleasant family life, as she only occasionally saw her father at the bar. Some stories also mention that Marianne worked late into the night and then slept all day, leaving her 7-year-old daughter alone for much of the day. Anna used this time to play around the neighborhood alone, greeting people and playing with their pets. It was even mentioned that Marianne was aware of her problematic lifestyle and sometimes contemplated the idea of giving Anna up for adoption. This leads us to May 5, 1980, where it is unclear exactly what happened that morning between Anna and Marianne. Some say they argued because Anna woke up in a bad mood and stubbornly did not want to go to school but wanted to play in the park, which Marianne did not allow. There's another version where Anna asked permission from her mother to skip school to play in the park with friends, and Marianne eventually let her go, not suspecting her daughter's real intentions to play elsewhere. Regardless, Anna was playing outside when the ensuing events turned into a tragedy in Marianne's life. When Marianne returned home later that day, she found it strange not to find her daughter anywhere but decided to wait a few more hours for her return. As time passed and Anna did not return, Marianne started searching the neighborhood. She asked Anna's friends and locals if they knew anything about her daughter, but nobody knew anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So Marianne reported this anomaly to the police. The next day, a very upset and nervous woman arrived at the police. It seemed that this man, Klaus Grabowski, 35 years old, was overcome with guilt after the act and couldn't find peace. He ended up confessing in detail what happened to his girlfriend. This caused a great argument, after which he left, confused, to go to a bar for a beer. His girlfriend took this opportunity to go to the police station to report him. The truth was that Anna had been abducted by Klaus, who owned a butcher shop near Marianne's house. Anna had gone there intending to play because the man had promised her that she could play with his cats whenever she wanted to visit. Innocently, Anna went and rang the doorbell. Klaus received her and kept her in his house for several hours, assaulting her multiple times until finally, to prevent the child from confessing the facts, he ended her life by suffocation with a pair of his girlfriend's stockings. Klaus Grabowski had a history of criminal activities and had previously been convicted for the assault of 2 young girls. He was known to have a troubled past. In 1973, he attacked a 6-year-old girl and was charged with attempted murder. 2 years later, he faced charges for these crimes, leading to a psychological evaluation. The results indicated he had an abnormal sexual instinct and significantly limited capacity to control it. Consequently, he was sent to a psychological treatment center instead of prison. A few years later, Klaus was offered the option of undergoing a controversial chemical castration procedure in exchange for early release, which he readily accepted. This procedure involved administering drugs to reduce libido and testosterone levels, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. Klaus preferred this option over returning to a mental health facility. It was a common practice for offenders of such crimes, often resulting in reduced sentences under the assumption that they no longer posed a societal threat. Despite the reversibility of this procedure, Klaus was released soon after undergoing it, without subsequent psychological evaluations. 2 years later, he underwent hormonal treatment to reverse the chemical castration, increasing his testosterone levels. This treatment was approved by the court under the pretext that he wanted to start a family with his girlfriend and lead a normal life, thus misleading everyone about his true nature. On the day of the incident, authorities quickly headed to Klaus's residence, but couldn't find him. He had taken Anna's body and left a note for his girlfriend, asking her to meet him at a bar that night to discuss the situation. The police took this opportunity to wait for Klaus at the bar and arrested him upon his arrival. After his arrest, Klaus claimed he had no intention of inappropriately touching Anna. He despicably defended himself by alleging that the child tried to seduce and extort him, and fear of returning to jail drove him to end her life. He claimed Anna had threatened to tell her mother he had inappropriately touched her, a claim he insisted was false and made with the intent to extort money from him. Klaus revealed he had hidden the body in a cardboard box near a canal. When the police informed Marianne about her daughter's whereabouts and tragic demise, she was devastated. However, the trial brought further anguish. Marianne was forced to hear testimonies and descriptions about her life and Anna's, suggesting that Anna was practically raised on the streets and that such an incident was inevitable due to Marianne's negligence as a bar waitress who worked late nights and neglected her daughter. This left Marianne heartbroken and furious, particularly tormented by the possibility that Anna's killer might not receive the maximum penalty due to potential claims of mental health issues, which could allow him to avoid prison. Consequently, Marianne silently began to devise a plan to avenge her daughter's death, regardless of the consequences. During the trial, Klaus Grabowski repeatedly claimed that Anna had seduced and extorted him for money, insisting that his actions were driven by the fear of returning to jail. His defense also centered around the idea that the hormonal treatment he was undergoing significantly affected him and led to violent outbursts. Frustrated and injured by these lies, Marianne decided to buy a gun and secretly practice shooting. Every time Marianne attended the trial, her displeasure was evident, especially when she heard statements that defamed her 7-year-old daughter. At one point, she expressed clear anger, unable to bear listening to Klaus and his lawyer's fabrications. However, the trial took a dramatic turn on its third day, March 6, 1981. Marianne arrived at the courtroom later than usual, entering with an expressionless face. She walked with an upright posture, her hands in the pockets of her white coat. Unbeknownst to others, she had managed to bypass the strict security measures of the judicial establishment with a pistol in her pocket. As the judge and others in the courtroom carried on with the proceedings, Klaus, with his back to Marianne, faced the judge. At this moment, Marianne stood still, her nerves palpable. She seized the opportunity to act when Klaus stood up to give his statement. Marianne pulled out the pistol and fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus, causing him to collapse. The precision of her shots was noted by many. Marianne remained expressionless throughout, slightly moving her lips as she fired. She made no attempt to flee and did not resist when the courtroom security detained her. Marianne was heard saying, "That pig killed my daughter. He shot her in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Her wish was confirmed when an officer checked Klaus and declared him dead. Upon hearing this, a look of relief crossed Marianne's face, contrasting her previous expressions. However, Marianne now faced her own trial, which would not be easy to escape. Those who witnessed the incident noted that Marianne seemed to be in a trance, struggling to comprehend her actions. The forensic psychiatrist examined her, asking her to write something to analyze her handwriting and mental state. Marianne wrote, "I did it for Anna," surrounding the sentence with 7 hearts, possibly representing each year of Anna's life. The next day, German newspapers displayed Marianne's photo, dubbing her the avenging mother. The case became the most well-known instance of vigilante justice in West Germany, garnering extensive media coverage. Television crews from across Europe rushed to report on the case, highlighting its extraordinary and tragic nature. Marianne was quickly brought to trial for murder. During her trial, she testified that she was not fully aware of her actions, claiming she was in a trance and even had a dream where she saw Anna walking through the courtrooms. She also mentioned her mental health had deteriorated significantly following the events. Marianne then told a lie that likely worsened her standing with the judge. She claimed she had bought the gun to end her own life, but no one believed she hadn't premeditated her actions and practiced with the weapon before using it in court. Many people in Germany and around the world supported Marianne for taking matters into her own hands, as they felt the system had failed by previously freeing Klaus and authorizing his hormonal treatment without proper evaluation. They saw it as fair to set her free. However, there were also those who viewed Marianne as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands in the worst possible way, labeling her a murderer. Others judged her for being an irresponsible mother who had given up her other 2 children for adoption and committed a cold-blooded crime that could have harmed others in the process. With all this controversy and mixed feelings, Marianne was charged with murder in a judicial process for the death of Klaus Grabowski on November 2, 1982. The prosecution later withdrew the charge, and after 28 days of negotiations, the jury reached a verdict. In March 1983, Marianne was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, sentenced to 6 years in prison. 3 years later, the authorities reconsidered, believing she didn't deserve any sentence. Soon after, Marianne sold her life story for about 250,000 German marks in an exclusive to a news magazine, stating she did it to pay off the debts caused by the judicial process. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, she returned to a now unified Germany after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. During this time, Marianne was interviewed by various media outlets, often placed in tense situations with questions comparing her to Klaus, as both were murderers. Despite this, she maintained her composure, stating she did what she did to ensure Klaus faced justice for his actions against the 7-year-old girl, even as he continued to spread lies about her in his final moments. Knowing her illness was terminal, Marianne asked a reporter to accompany her with a movie camera until her last moments. Marianne passed away at the age of 46 on September 17, 1996, from pancreatic cancer. She was buried next to her daughter Anna's grave in the Lubec cemetery. Tair Arada was the pride and joy of Shemuel and Ilana Arada, inhabitants of the peaceful Katzrin, a short distance from Haifa in Israel. She grew up with her older siblings, Roy and Ohad, who were always watchful and caring towards her. Tair's vivacious spirit, love for the arts, and talent in dance made her stand out. Her friends fondly referred to her as their guiding star. Naturally, Tair's charisma meant she led and others were inclined to follow. Though her beauty and wit sometimes brewed jealousy among other young girls, any rifts were generally short-lived since many of these girls had been friends from childhood. Tair's daily life included attending a local high school, and like many kids in her neighborhood, she preferred walking to school. It was her routine to call her mother upon reaching home, a reassuring habit for the family. However, on the fateful day of December 6, 2006, things took a turn. Skipping her last class to mingle with her friends, Tair was her usual self, blending in and enjoying the camaraderie. Around 1:20 p.m., she got really thirsty, so she went to the school building to get a drink. Some younger students recall seeing her on the floor where the 10th grade classrooms were located. However, at night, when the usual call didn't come that evening, her mother grew anxious. Initially dismissing it as a simple delay or a visit to a friend's house, worry soon set in when Tair was nowhere to be found. Her family tried calling her many times on her phone, but she didn't pick up. This made them worry and feel very sad.
Ilana's motherly instincts screamed that something was wrong. Without a second thought, she mobilized a search party made up of relatives, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers, all rallying to find Tair. Shemuel, in sheer desperation, joined the search, navigating through the cold, dark streets. The level of distress and panic among Tair's family was palpable. Nobody had seen her since she went into the school earlier, so the police were quickly sent to the school to start looking for her. At around 7 p.m., a group mainly comprising the Rada family's close circle ventured into the school. They searched through the dark hallways and rooms until they got to the girls' restroom for 10th graders. There they found something unsettling. One of the restroom stalls had its door locked. They saw feet inside, but when they called out, there was a spooky silence, and nobody responded. They used a nearby stall to help them look over, and what they saw was beyond belief. Tair was lying there, not alive, and it was clear that something terrible had happened to her. The walls and floor showed signs of something really scary. She had injuries that were proof of a violent attack, and it was clear that her last moments were filled with fear. The shocking discovery deeply shocked the whole community. Shemuel, who was in a lot of pain, couldn't get close to the crime scene because of how horrifying it was. Tair's brother was so upset that he had to be held back. Everyone in the community was really upset and angry. They couldn't understand how something so terrible could happen in a place where children were supposed to be safe. Parents were worried about their kids' safety and talked about whether it was safe to send them back to school. For a while, the school became a place where a crime had happened, and all the normal classes and activities had to stop. People were confused because the police were searching in a wider area instead of concentrating on the school, which is what the locals thought they would do. The police were talking to people to find out where Tair had last been. 2 people who knew her said they saw her go up the school stairs by herself, without anyone following her. Many students reported being in the restroom around the same time frame as Tair, with several pointing out peculiar occurrences. In the span of 40 minutes, an estimated 10 to 12 girls used the restroom. Yet the police chose to interview only a handful. What struck investigators as particularly odd was how amidst this constant traffic, no one seemed to have witnessed or heard the violent act that took Tair's life. Some students noted anomalies, like the presence of an unfamiliar girl with curly hair. One of Tair's friends, who was confident she knew most of the student body, couldn't recall seeing this girl either before or after that day. Although the mystery girl wore a school shirt, she was perceived as a new student. A specific student claimed to have observed 2 sets of feet in the stall where Tair was later found, Tair's recognizable sneakers, and another pair of youth-sized all-stars. She, however, dismissed this observation, attributing a foul odor in the restroom as a reason to leave quickly. Another student, after knocking on the stall's door, was informed it was occupied. The police seemed especially interested in discerning the gender of this voice. Even though she repeatedly mentioned it was a female's voice, she felt the officers were unsatisfied with her response. With the whole community offering their help and sympathy, the Reda family was going through a very sad and difficult time, trying to understand that they had lost Tair. Haim Sadovsky, a private investigator, was really moved by Tair's case, especially because his own daughter was the same age as Tair. He got in touch with the Rada family and offered to use his skills to help them. They were thankful and told him everything they could. Ilana mentioned a peculiar observation. When a group of Tair's friends visited to offer condolences, 2 girls seemed to be having a secretive conversation, prompting Ilana to think they might be withholding crucial information. Haim investigated further, finding numerous inconsistencies in their police statements. Interestingly, one of Tair's classmates went to look for her bag in class, but didn't find it strange that Tair wasn't there. Another classmate mentioned that Tair seemed unusually distant during her favorite class, theater. When her teacher asked what was wrong, Tair's response was really unsettling, "Because I fear death." This made a lot of people wonder if Tair had a feeling that something bad was going to happen to her.
When they looked into it more, Tair's friends shared a really disturbing story. They talked about an 18-year-old from Tiberias named Avi who seemed to be fixated on Tair. He kept calling and texting her a lot, and he even made a really scary threat. He said he would harm her if she didn't agree to be in a romantic relationship with him. Avi made Tair even more anxious by insisting on meeting her, and when she said no, he threatened her with harm again. But upon police investigation, there was no evidence to corroborate any interactions between Tair and this supposed stalker, Avi. This brought up an important question. Why would Tair's friends come up with such a story? Could it be a way to distract from something else? Haim Sadovsky, during his investigation, reasoned that the extreme violence inflicted upon Tair didn't seem characteristic of an adult assailant. An adult wouldn't need to exert such brutality to overpower a young girl. He postulated that the culprits were likely two individuals, roughly Tair's age and stature. Aside from the two girls who were previously suspected, there was another person Tair knew who caught their attention. This girl was similar to Tair in terms of looks and intelligence, but they had a noticeable dislike for each other. Tair had told her mom about her concerns regarding this person at the beginning of the school year. What's interesting is that this girl left town not long after Tair's death, and when the authorities asked her about students leaving town, she avoided giving a straight answer. Despite initial suspicions pointing towards Tair's classmates, the investigation did not yield any DNA, fingerprints, or shoe imprints as evidence. Authorities then shifted their focus to a gardener employed at the school. His presence in the teacher's lounge on the fateful day, combined with his seemingly disoriented demeanor, as noted by the school psychologist, made him a person of interest. But the school's gardener had a strong alibi that made it hard for the police to connect him to the crime. Even though the psychologist's statements seemed believable, the police were stuck with a lot of uncertainties and not enough answers. Then, in a surprising turn of events, the investigation started looking at someone else who looked very much like the school's gardener. This led investigators to believe that the school psychologist could have mistakenly identified the two. Roman Zadorov, a construction worker at the school, found himself under the investigative lens shortly after Tair's murder. A recent immigrant from Ukraine, Zadorov had relocated to Israel 2 years prior and was earning a living through miscellaneous construction jobs. He had met his wife, Olga, back in Ukraine, and the two were high school sweethearts. His family made the move to Israel, where he was then employed as a handyman for a contractor. Due to visa restrictions, Zadorov wasn't legally allowed to work, so he was compensated in cash. At his wife's urging, Zadorov had initiated the process of acquiring Israeli citizenship during the time of his arrest. He wasn't fluent in Hebrew and mostly communicated in Russian. The police's suspicion was aroused when Zadorov revealed that he had discarded the clothes he wore on the day of Tair's murder. During the long hours of his interrogation, while denying any involvement in the crime, investigators scoured his residence. They unearthed pornographic content on his computer, which, upon closer inspection, involved young but legally aged women. Further amplifying suspicion was Zadorov's collection of knives, especially given the nature of Tair's injuries. Zadorov's detention was based on the circumstantial evidence of the knives and the school psychologist's potentially mistaken testimony. Adding to the tension was the media's reporting of unverified information, claims that Zadorov's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. This, however, was not accurate. While DNA samples were indeed sent to the U.S. for testing, the results were pending. The interrogation tactics took a contentious turn. Authorities missiled Zadorov, stating that his DNA was present at the crime scene in an attempt to extract a confession. Although Zadorov initially resisted, he was pressured into thinking the evidence was undeniable. He speculated that perhaps he inadvertently stepped in blood he had noticed in the school's male restroom, thus explaining any potential trace. After this grueling questioning, he was placed in a holding cell, suggesting further developments in the case were imminent. Something surprising happened. Zadorov's cellmate turned out to be working with the police. They promised him a lot of money, and even more if he could get Zadorov to admit to the crime. But Zadorov didn't give in. He kept saying he didn't do it, especially because he had just become a father and didn't want to lose his family. But after more than a week, the informant tried a different approach. He made Zadorov believe that the evidence against him was really strong, and his best chance to get a shorter prison sentence would be to admit to a lesser crime like manslaughter. That way, he might spend less time in jail. Under significant pressure, and with the informant's guidance, Zadorov was led to believe that he might have acted in a fit of uncontrollable rage, a side effect of feeling marginalized as an immigrant in Israel. Zadorov started doubting his own memory, pondering over past incidents where he acted out and later had no recollection of the event. Eventually, he mused, maybe I did kill her. If everything points towards me, perhaps I did it. Yet inconsistencies remained. Zadorov recalled working late on the day of Tair's murder and wasn't covered in any blood. His discarded trousers, which had been a point of suspicion, were thrown away due to their uncomfortable fit, not any purported bloodstains. Without Zadorov knowing, his talks in the prison cell were being recorded. Taking advantage of Zadorov's growing uncertainty, the investigators convinced him to act out what happened during a crime at the school, and they recorded everything on video. The authorities thought this was the proof they needed. Later, in a press conference, they said they had caught Tair's killer and suggested that a small argument over cigarettes had made Zadorov react violently. However, Tair's family and friends challenged this narrative. They desired more concrete forensic evidence. They felt in their core that Zadorov wasn't the actual perpetrator. Their skepticism was compounded by the police's claim regarding the cigarette altercation. Tair was known to detest smoking and was unlikely to insult anyone, especially someone older than her. Tair's mother, Ilana Rada, was persistent in her belief that the real killer came from Tair's circle of friends. Over the years, she gathered information, growing increasingly convinced that there were unsettling dynamics within Tair's close group of friends leading up to her tragic death. Ilana, while digging deeper into the school's culture, found some disturbing information. She thought that a lot of students might be part of a satanic group, and she started thinking that Tair's death could have been a part of a ritual. As the investigation continued, Roman Zadorov's wife got in touch with their legal team. After they did their own investigation, they came to the conclusion that Zadorov was being blamed for something he didn't do and had been manipulated into confessing. Zadorov quickly recanted his confession, yet remained incarcerated awaiting his trial, which commenced on July 2, 2007. The prosecution's narrative took a dramatic turn. They suggested that traumatic childhood experiences from Ukraine were triggered when Zadorov began working at a school, leading to an explosive reaction when provoked by the students. They also misleadingly stated that DNA evidence tied Zadorov to the crime scene, even though the results from the U.S. had not been received. The defense, however, dismantled the prosecution's claims one by one. Despite the crime scene being dense with various pieces of evidence like blood, hair, and footprints, not a single trace linked Zadorov. His residence was scored extensively, even his washing machine, but yielded no ties to the crime. 3 hairs on Tair's body matched 3 different individuals, none being Zadorov. 60 fingerprints found at the site didn't match him either. Moreover, Zadorov's timeline for the day provided him with a reliable alibi. His whereabouts were confirmed by various people at different times, ensuring he was nowhere near the crime scene during the estimated time of Tair's death. The prosecution relied a lot on Zadorov's confession, even though it had many mistakes. When they reenacted the crime, it didn't match up, and it seemed like the police were telling him what to say. They said Zadorov knew things only the real killer would know, but the defense argued that the investigators actually told him all those exclusive details. When Zadorov was asked to show how certain parts of the crime happened, he kept getting it wrong, and the officers had to help him until his answers matched the evidence. Furthermore, The nature of Tair's injuries suggested they were inflicted by a left-handed individual, while Zadorov was right-handed. The multiple inconsistencies in Zadorov's confession raised significant doubts about its authenticity and the integrity of the investigation. Zadorov's confession had a lot of inconsistencies, and the defense team pointed them out clearly. He said he used a knife with a smooth blade, but the forensic evidence showed that the weapon had a serrated edge. To make things more confusing, during the reenactment of the school, Zadorov took the officers to the wrong restroom. The actual crime scene was easy to spot because there was still crime scene tape there, which was a pretty big mistake. Also, when Zadorov showed how he escaped from the restroom cubicle, it didn't match the evidence at the crime scene. He said he jumped over the cubicle door, but the footprints suggested that the killer climbed over the neighboring cubicle instead. Prosecutors argued that a bloody footprint at the scene matched Zadorov's specific shoe brand. However, this claim lost weight given that no blood was found on his actual shoes. Considering the violent nature of the crime, it seemed improbable that he could be present in the cubicle without his shoes being splattered with blood. Despite these glaring inconsistencies and the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crime, Zadorov was found guilty and handed a life sentence. The court labeled his statements as deceitful, adding charges of obstructing a police investigation. After the trial, Tair's mother initially believed Zadorov was the perpetrator, swayed by his confession and the supposed footprint evidence. Yet, in the ensuing months, her conviction wavered. The Lanarada soon went public with her distrust in the legal system and voiced suspicions towards students at Tair's school, even suggesting a satanic ritual might be involved. Refusing to accept the verdict, Zadorov's defense team remained undeterred in their pursuit of justice. Further muddying the case's credibility was a scandal involving the presiding judge, who later resigned due to charges of indecent offenses against minors. Public sentiment started to shift towards Zadorov, with many voicing their support for his innocence and demanding justice for Tair. In 2016, a documentary, Shadow of Truth, spotlighted the case and introduced a harrowing confession from an anonymous individual. He recounted a chilling admission from his ex-girlfriend, referred to as AK, who confessed to Tair's murder. This former student of the same high school confessed to wearing the school's uniform, lying in wait, and killing Tair in a ritualistic manner. This confession eerily aligned with earlier police testimonies from a student. Ak's backstory further darkened this narrative. She had a traumatic childhood, which included witnessing extreme violence and being concealed in a wolf's corpse for warmth. These experiences led her to have disturbing fantasies about violence and blood, to the point where she became obsessed with them. After Tair's murder, AK supposedly told her lover all the gruesome details of the crime, even showing them her blood-soaked clothes and the murder weapon. She went into great detail about what she did and what happened afterward, and it strangely matched what investigators had already found. Bringing back these unsettling claims and stories only added to the complexity and uncertainty of the case. In the dark aftermath of Tair's murder, AK stayed close to the lifeless body, hiding until it was safe to leave. She managed to slip away without anyone noticing, changing out of her blood-stained clothes and getting clean ones before making her escape. Once she got home, she cleaned herself up and disappeared from everyone's radar. Roman Zadorov's defense team was eager to probe deeper into the account relayed by AK's ex-boyfriend. They subjected him to 3 lie detector tests, all of which he passed without any signs of deceit. This prompted the police to arrest AK, a striking blonde woman who vehemently denied any involvement in Tair's killing. AK shifted the blame to her former lover, accusing him of both harboring bloody fantasies and physically assaulting her. Things took a really unsettling turn when AK, who was on house arrest, tried to harm her current boyfriend. When he rejected her, an intoxicated AK threatened him with a piece of broken glass. Luckily, people nearby stopped her from carrying out the attack. When the police arrested her, AK suddenly had a scary change of heart and confirmed the horrifying things her ex-boyfriend had told them before. Even though AK was found unfit to go to trial for the attempted murder and was sent to a mental health facility, no formal charges were filed against her. On the other hand, her ex-boyfriend had to deal with charges of obstructing justice and indecent assault while he was in prison. While he was behind bars, the authorities made him a proposition. If he took back what he had said about AK's involvement in Tair's murder, they would drop his charges. He strongly and dramatically refused, even threatening to take his own life, while insisting that AK was responsible for Tair's tragic death. The tragic murder of Tair Rada not only took away a young, promising life, but also shattered the lives of those who loved her. The passing of Shemuel Rada, Tair's father, in January 2016, further added to the family's anguish. During Shemuel's final farewell, Ilana read his heart-wrenching words, calling Shemuel a king soon to be reunited with his queen. Tair underlined the depths of her pain. And amidst her own overwhelming grief, she expressed her own yearning to join them. Yet, the story continued to unfold. The discovery of new forensic evidence in 2018 threw a wrench into the case's perceived conclusions. The matching DNA of a hair found on Tair's body to the man who had earlier made revelations about AK muddied the waters even more. It raised pressing questions. Was he the true perpetrator, or had he been speaking the truth throughout? His proximity to AK during the murder, and the fact that criminals often immerse themselves in investigations added layers of complexity. In 2019, Zadorov's attorney Yoram Halevi filed a request with the Supreme Court for a trial, claiming the existence of a lot of new evidence that proves unequivocally that Zadorov did not murder the deceased and could not have murdered the deceased. In a dramatic ruling in perhaps the most famous murder case in Israeli history, Roman Zadorov was acquitted on March 2023 of the 2006 murder of a 13-year-old schoolgirl that horrified the nation, in a retrial that overturned previous convictions that saw him serve more than a decade behind bars after being sentenced to life. The panel of 3 judges at the Nazareth District Court announced a 2-1 decision to exonerate Zadorov, who burst into tears and later said, "The truth triumphed. I am happy. I was confined to my home. Now I will take my children for a stroll." Judges Asher Kula and Danny Sarfati acquitted Zadorov, while the third judge, Tamer Nissim Shai, ruled that he was guilty. The verdict is some 700 pages long. A representative of the state prosecutors in the case said her team would study the verdict and then decide whether to appeal the acquittal to the Supreme Court. At the end of the verdict reading, Judge Kula turned to Ilana Rada, the victim's mother. "We tried to solve the mystery, but it is possible that Tair took her secret to the grave," he said. Ilana Rada answered, "At last, after 16 years of lies, justice was served. The war is just beginning. This is a cover-up by the prosecution. The prosecutors of the State of Israel murdered my daughter," she added, reiterating her past accusations that the poor investigative work and alleged framing of Zadorov had been tantamount to murdering her daughter all over again. While at the moment no one has been charged for Tair's murder, we hope it will happen in a near future. Nibaldo Villegas worked as a computers teacher in the Valparaiso region of Chile. Everyone who knew him said he was a kind man who loved to help. He had many friends, both within and outside his work environment, and enjoyed socializing, often meeting up with relatives and friends. However, he never neglected his job. In 2009, when Nibaldo was 41, he met Johanna Hernandez, a 23-year-old woman studying at the same university where he taught. Johanna was going through a tough time, having just ended a relationship with her boyfriend since she was 15, with whom she had 2 children. Nibaldo was like a beacon of light for her. In December of that year, they started a relationship, and both their lives improved. Nibaldo and his family welcomed Johanna's children as if they were their own. After getting married, Nibaldo built a house with his own hands for them to live together and be happy. Their greatest joy came when Johanna gave birth to a daughter, their first child together. For 8 years, the relationship faced no major problems, and Nibaldo's professional life continued to prosper. Motivated by him, Johanna continued her nursing technician studies. When they did argue, Nibaldo preferred to go running, and upon returning, after both had time to reflect, they would talk in their bedroom and resolve their differences. But good things don't last forever. In 2018, their arguments became constant. Johanna started reacting differently to problems, becoming physically and emotionally violent. Nibaldo tried his usual approach of walking away and returning when she was ready to talk, but Johanna had changed. Her mood would shift rapidly, leaving Nibaldo with no time to leave. Things escalated to the point where Johanna, during an argument, started throwing things around and declared the relationship over. Nibaldo agreed to end the relationship but was concerned about her reactions. He went to the police station and filed a domestic violence report, fearing for his daughter's safety. Although the police dismissed the complaint, Johanna took it seriously, and a big dispute ensued over the house and custody of their daughter. Due to Johanna's violent outbursts, Nibaldo sought full custody. The family completely broke down, stopped living together, and Nibaldo filed for divorce, only seeing each other through lawyers. Eventually, the courts ruled for shared custody, which Johanna did not accept well. She began harassing Nibaldo, demanding the house he had painstakingly built. On one occasion, she showed up at the university parking lot and threw stones at his car. Nibaldo maintained his composure, not wanting to worsen the situation or make his daughter uncomfortable, and eagerly awaited the finalization of their divorce for a change. August 10, 2018, was an important date for Nibaldo, his 50th birthday. He spent most of the day with his daughter, but went to his parents' house in the evening. He left his daughter with them as he was dining with friends and promised to return soon to put her to bed. The grandparents were happy to take care of her and spent quality time with her for several hours. However, when bedtime came, Nibaldo didn't show up. They tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Nibaldo, who was always attentive when his daughter wasn't with him. They decided to go to their son's house. On arrival, they noticed something suspicious. Nibaldo's car was parked in front. They entered the house and saw the house keys on a table, along with the jacket their son had been wearing when he left his daughter before dinner. However, what struck them most was a shattered glass on the floor. They hurried upstairs to Nibaldo's bedroom, fearing what they suspected. Their son was nowhere to be found, and their alarm grew. That same night, Nibaldo's parents went to the police station to file a missing person report. The search operation began immediately, involving friends, university acquaintances, and even neighbors, but no one knew where Nibaldo was. When Johanna was interrogated, she stated they hadn't seen each other for a long time due to their separation and appeared extremely distressed about his disappearance. Days later, Johanna showed up at Nibaldo's house, which his brother was staying at, carrying a large bag. She declared she would stay as long as she wanted, claiming it was her house too since they were still legally married. This seemed odd to the brother, knowing the couple had ended on very bad terms. To the Villegas family's surprise, Johanna became increasingly involved in the search for Nibaldo, posting on Facebook and giving interviews where she tearfully pleaded for her estranged partner's return. For 5 days, the country was gripped by the search for the missing teacher, until a boat brought an answer. On August 15 of that year, workers at the pier near Valparaiso, while performing their duties, spotted something alarming in the water. A human torso without limbs was floating in the calm sea. They immediately alerted the police. Once the authorities and forensic experts arrived, They determined it was a man between 30 and 50 years old. While they couldn't establish the identity yet, everyone thought the same. It had to be the missing professor, whose face had been all over the television for the past 5 days. On August 20, the prosecution and homicide brigade of the investigative police confirmed that the torso belonged to none other than Nibaldo. The discovery made a strong statement. Nibaldo was a peaceful man, got along with everyone, and had never been involved in anything illegal. The perpetrator had to be someone from his close circle. As detectives began their investigation, Johanna was the first of Nibaldo's relatives to give a television interview, again crying inconsolably, urging the capture of the culprit. Unbeknownst to her, she was exposing herself. On the day the body was found, 2 men went to the police station, wanting to speak to detectives about what they had seen on the day Nibaldo disappeared. On the early morning of August 11, the 2 individuals headed to the beach, intending to go on a fishing trip. Although unfamiliar with the area, they were excited about the expedition. However, their enthusiasm waned when they got lost at sea in the dark. Just as they were losing hope, they saw distant orange flames. They approached the shore with their boat and noticed a bonfire. A man was trying to keep the flames alive, using branches, cloths, and other objects they couldn't identify. The fisherman approached to ask for directions, thinking he might be lost like them. They tried to engage in casual conversation, but the man barely responded, only telling them it wasn't a good area for fishing before turning his attention back to the fire. The fishermen found the situation odd, especially when they noticed a blue car parked a few meters from the bonfire, with a woman inside smoking frantically. The situation seemed highly suspicious, but with nowhere else to go, the fishermen decided to stay overnight for shelter from the cold. At dawn, the woman got out of the car and approached the man by the fire. They appeared unaware of the fisherman's presence, shared a kiss, and gave one last look at the bonfire before driving away without a word. Before leaving, the fisherman took a closer look at the fire and noticed a sharp knife among the flames. Although it seemed strange, they preferred not to investigate further. They didn't think about that night again, until days later when a human torso was found floating near where they had been, realizing they had accidentally witnessed a terrible crime. After hearing the fisherman's story, the police went to the beach. It was a secluded area, so the remains of the bonfire were still there. They discovered that the mysterious man wasn't just burning branches and cloths, but also human remains. Forensic experts confirmed these were the remaining limbs of Nibaldo. But the fishermen provided another crucial piece of information. They described the woman smoking in the blue car as dark-haired, with long, straight hair of a darker complexion and around 30 years old. The same woman seen crying on television. From that moment, the police began investigating Johanna as the primary suspect in Nibaldo's murder. The only question was the identity of the man with her. Days later, the police discovered that Nibaldo's credit card had been used to withdraw 35,000 pesos from an ATM at a gas station on the morning of August 11. Security cameras showed a man in black making the transaction. The victim's family recognized him as Johanna's current partner, Francisco Silva. Additionally, shortly after the body's identification, Johanna went to a real estate agency to inquire about the property registered to Nibaldo, which they had fought over countless times, and where she had moved after his disappearance. There was no doubt that both Johanna and Silva were guilty of the crime. Both suspects gave their testimony at the oral criminal court. They admitted to being part of the crime, but blamed each other for its execution. Johanna was the first to give her version. She said her relationship with Silva was extremely complicated. Since they started dating, he had been manipulative, controlling what she wore, who she associated with,
and even encouraged her to sign a prenuptial agreement. Silva's violence was not only reflected in his relationship with Johanna, but also in his strong feelings towards Nibaldo, seemingly driven by jealousy. After Nibaldo tried to gain full custody of the daughter he shared with Johanna, she came home crying. This intensified Silva's hatred, who said he would make Nibaldo disappear someday. The week before, on August 10, 2018, Silva arrived at Johanna's house with a jar containing a blue powder, instructing her not to ask questions and indicating he would have orders for her during the week. Accustomed to obeying Silva, Johanna agreed. On the Friday of Nibaldo's birthday, Francisco Silva contacted Johanna, instructing her to meet him to celebrate, and detailed the steps to follow. That night, Johanna arrived at the house of Nibaldo. He greeted her, hoping for reconciliation. Johanna brought sushi and a drink for dinner, but she omitted a crucial detail. The drink was laced with clonazepam. 10 minutes after sitting down to eat, Nibaldo began to doze off. Once he was completely unconscious, Johanna took him to his bed, snapped 2 photos, and sent them to Silva, completing her part of the plan. Silva then entered the house, changed into black clothing, and headed to the room where Nibaldo was carrying a knife. Minutes later, he came downstairs and informed Johanna that he had mutilated Nibaldo. He gave her gloves to clean the blood in the room and a trash bag for the limbs. While disposing of the body, Silva ominously warned Johanna that no matter what happened, she must not accuse him, or he would ensure she was seen as the true perpetrator. They then drove to the beach, where they'd burned the limbs and clothing in a bonfire, and tossed the torso into the sea. However, Silva's version was somewhat different. He not only denied Johanna's accusations, but also portrayed her as a violent person, prone to destructive outbursts when angry. According to him, Johanna used her tantrums and intimacy to manipulate him. He mentioned the prenuptial contract as a joke, inside gag after watching the movie 50 Shades, which she exploited to her advantage. The worst crisis came when Nibaldo wanted full custody of their daughter. Johanna swore she'd never forgive him and was ready to murder him. Seeing how upset Johanna was, Silva felt it was his duty as a man to do something about it and decided to do whatever she asked. Days later, Johanna requested he buy 30 clonazepam pills and grind them, which he did. The main difference in Silva's story was that on Friday, August 10, they were to follow their usual routine of having a barbecue, drinking, and sleeping in his car at the beach. However, when he picked Johanna up from her mother's house, he learned she had a different plan. She said they needed to stop by Nibaldo's to discuss their daughter. Once there, Johanna asked Silva to wait at a nearby place and wait for her instructions. He agreed. At 1 a.m., Silva woke to 3 WhatsApp messages from Johanna, 2 photos of an unconscious Nibaldo in bed, and a 3rd message asking him to come get her. Arriving at the house, Johanna was frantic, explaining she had drugged Nibaldo with clonazepam before attacking him with a knife. The problem was that while she was stabbing him, Nibaldo woke up, and his pleas could be heard from the bedroom. Johanna instructed Silva to finish the murder, handing him a sharp knife. Silva went upstairs and fatally stabbed Nibaldo in the thoracic area. Immediately after, Johanna asked Silva to help her dismember the body to make it easier to hide. The rest of the story, involving the movement and concealment of different body parts, was exactly the same in both their accounts, seemingly the only aspect they both wanted to take responsibility for. The methods of the murder and the locations where the body parts were found matched in both stories. What differed was the principal perpetrator, as each one aimed to receive a lesser sentence. They also agreed in their statement that the murder was not premeditated. However,
The prosecutors argued that the crime seemed meticulously planned, given how it was executed. Technology experts located both of their cell phones at Nibaldo's house at the time of his death, and both had photos of the unconscious man in bed, implicating Johanna and Silva equally in the eyes of justice. The prosecutor stated that Johanna was the material author of the crime. Francisco Silva was convicted as the material author of qualified homicide. Both had the aggravating factor of treachery, which occurs when the perpetrator uses means or ways to eliminate all the victim's possibilities of defense. In Nibaldo's case, the means was the substance that rendered him unconscious. On May 16, 2019, the criminal court informed the sentence for both defendants. Receiving the maximum possible penalty, Johanna was sentenced to life imprisonment, meaning she must serve 40 years before being eligible for penitentiary benefits. Silva was sentenced to simple life imprisonment, meaning he could opt for penitentiary benefits after 20 years. Johanna's defense requested a reclassification of the sentence, arguing she had collaborated with the investigation. They also sought to annul the aggravating factor of treachery, claiming there was no proof of clomazepam administration. Silva's lawyer also tried to reduce the sentence by claiming active participation in the investigation. Fortunately for the victim's family, both requests were denied. About 100 people gathered outside the court, celebrating with intense banners, but while citizens unrelated to the crime celebrated, the families involved in the case were left shattered. The Villegas family's lawyers stated that while they were satisfied with the sentence, Nibaldo's siblings would seek an update in the law, advocating for harsher penalties in dismemberment cases. Without the complete body of the victim, they couldn't give a dignified burial. Johanna's father also spoke about the crime, saying she had always been manipulative and violent, but worsened after meeting Francisco Silva. He agreed with her sentence and said he would never forgive her. In other interviews, he recalled Nibaldo's good character and expressed that he would always consider him part of the family, often visiting his grave with flowers. After the trial, Johanna and Silva were transferred to a penitentiary complex, where their troubles did not end. In prison, Johanna gained a high status for having ended her husband's life, instilling fear in most of the other inmates. Silva, on the other hand, was completely isolated, only going out to the yard when other inmates were not there. His situation only worsened over time. He went on a hunger strike for several days and wrote a letter to the National Human Rights Institute and the Court of Appeals, requesting a reduction in his sentence. When his plans did not work, Silva tried to contact Johanna, telling her he had spoken with a lawyer and was trying to reopen the case. His plan was for Johanna to claim she was the murderer so he would be seen as an accomplice. According to him, this would frame the crime as a momentary act of violence and might reduce their sentences for lack of premeditation. Johanna refused outright. Enraged, Francisco threatened her, claiming he had contacts who could harm her at any time. Eventually, Johanna filed a complaint for murder threats with the public ministry, which could play in her favor as it portrayed Silva as manipulative and conspiratorial, just as she had described him in her version of the events. As a result, the only measures taken against Silva were the confiscation of his cell phone and his transfer to a high-security cell. He was also barred from receiving family visits. While the murderers continue their lives in prison, Nibaldo's family is still fighting for him to rest in peace. They submitted a request to amend the penal code. The proposal, named Nibaldo's Law, aimed to add a clause to more rigorously penalize dismemberment or damage to a corpse, increasing the sentence for perpetrators by 3 to 5 years. If enacted, this law would not be retroactive and would not change the sentences for Nibaldo's murderers, but it would apply to future cases. The Villegas family might never be able to give Nibaldo a dignified burial, but they could prevent other families from suffering the same pain. In March 2022, the law was unanimously approved by the Senate and is currently being debated in the Chamber of Deputies. If it passes, it will only need the executive's approval to be officially promulgated. The Villegas siblings continue to carry this fight on their shoulders. Nothing will bring Nibaldo back, but they are doing everything possible to make the world a fairer place.